Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Welcome to this episode of the Murder Part. Tonight we'll be looking at the case of Julie Ray. So we will start with introductions. Jeff?
My name is Jeff Pincin, and I'm a licensed professional counselor in Pennsylvania and Delaware, and I specialize in the treatment of OCD and other anxiety disorders. And if I wasn't a counselor, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to be a police officer who informally specialized in analyzing the morning dew on the ground, especially when there is no dew on the ground. Turns out that's incredibly specific, and nobody has a need for that. So
I wouldn't imagine there is much need for that.
I mean, I was really hopeful. Somebody's got to understand the morning dew, especially when there is none. There's got to be a need for it, is what I thought. Turns out there is no need for it, of course, and so I settled for a counselor.
Are you still interested in the morning dew?
I look at it every morning, especially when it's not even there. I'm just looking for it. It's it's an interest for sure.
How about in the mountains? Still interested in the dew in the mountains?
That's some of my favorite dew, the Mountain Dew. So I settled for counseling. It's
it's a tough break.
Yeah,
another sad story. It ends in counseling.
Right? Yeah. Happens all the time.
Mike? Hi, my name is Mike Smith, also a counselor in the state of Delaware, specializing in narrative therapy and geek therapy, and I'm self-styled expert in all things geek. And if I hadn't become a counselor, actually when I was a kid, I wanted to be a door-to-door steak knife salesman.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to go out to farm shows and things with my dad, and the guy doing the Ginsu knife demonstrations always seemed like really cool. Like being able to, stab different things and cut I was 13, cutting different things, like grabbing a lead pipe, cut through the lead pipe, and then slice a tomato, and it's like really cool. So I wanted to go around with these steak knives and show that to people, show them how they're resistant to keeping fluids and things on them too. Stab a steak a couple of times and drop it on the carpet. No stains. See. Unfortunately,
the splash-proof coating on the knives, right?
Proof coating on the knives.
Right.
Unfortunately, Amazon happened. And there's no need for door-to-door steak knife salesmen. We've talked time and again about how there's no need for salesmen going door-to-door anymore. And this is another one of those shattered dreams.
Yeah, really.
Just traveling across the country, randomly selling knives to people.
And assuring them that no intruder would ever come in and use that knife against them, because that can't happen.
Of course, that'll never happen.
Who would do that?
It doesn't.
That's a guarantee on the box.
I mean, that's usable in a court hearing. Everyone knows that the killer's not going to come in and use the knife that's in the kitchen. Everyone knows this.
Especially not one of our special knives.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Guaranteed.
But unfortunately, I had to settle for being a counselor because, the economy went and did economic things.
Oh, man. Lame.
Another shattered dream ending in becoming a mental health counselor.
Another tough break.
I forgot to say, stick around until the end. We'll respond to some comments and questions. And please leave a comment or question, and we may respond in future episodes. And we may even make another question part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we covered, 20 questions in the last question part, something like that.
Something like that.
And that was fun.
Yeah, that was a good episode.
Mm-hmm.
So this case, this murder part episode is about Julie Ray. This case was covered on 2020, not terribly long ago.
It's actually covered on 2020 twice.
Yeah.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was covered on 2020 back in 2002.
When it was originally seen by the author. Right.
Originally seen by the author.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that. But it was covered back then. And then it was covered again recently.
Yeah, this case is it's a little more satisfying than an unsolved case, but not quite as satisfying as a completely solved case, I guess you could say. Right, there's some fairly definitive answers in this case about what happened, but there's still a question mark over some of it. Yeah. So it's interesting. And so, covered on 2020 and on various other sources, a case that shows some of the shortcomings of juries that don't think things through or might have biases based on liberal or conservative ideology. The crucialness of the first few hours of investigation. Here again, we see that the police made mistakes early on, we'll talk about. And I think just the overall tragedy of a false conviction, which we've covered a few times, a few cases in the past. And it's always sad that this happens because the real killer gets away and an innocent person suffers. And they had a terrible loss. Because it seems like it's always the relative who gets falsely convicted.
Yeah, right.
So tell us a little bit about Julie Ray.
Before we get to that, I just wanted to mention there's actually another 2020 episode that actually ties into this case through the other person.
Oh, the killer.
Yeah.
Well, potentially the killer.
Potentially killer. But there's one, completely about what he was convicted for. And that one's really interesting too. But yeah.
So another one about Tommy Lynn Sells. Yeah. Okay. Very good. So this takes us back to October 13th, 1997. 10-year-old Joel Kirkpatrick was stabbed to death in his house, Lawrenceville, Illinois, around 4 a.m. And of course, terrible when anybody is murdered, but especially difficult to talk about a child who was just sleeping, just in his bed, and is just senselessly murdered. So his parents had been split up. They were divorced, Julie and Len. And so Julie was home. Joel was at Julie's house at the time of this. Julie heard a scream, yelled for Joel, and then the man attacked her, and the attack went outside ultimately. So Julie was able to get a good look at him. He took his mask off for some reason as he was leaving. And so Julie was the main and only suspect, she would come to find out. And they didn't indict her for 3 years, not until May of 2000. So this was 1997 when the murder occurred. Not until May of 2000 she was indicted, when a new prosecutor was on the case and got an indictment. So February 2002, the trial began, and we'll get into the details of what happened there. But ultimately, Julie was convicted and put in prison for this. So a true crime writer named Diane Fanning, and this is an interesting twist. This is not something that I don't think really ever happens, maybe rarely. True crime writer Diane Fanning was watching the original 2020 story on this, and she started to see some similarities between Julie Ray's case and a case that she was writing about a serial killer by the name of Tommy Lynn Sells. So she saw some similarities between what he did with these other murders and the murder of Joel. So she wrote a letter to Tommy Lynn Sells and ultimately wrote about it in her book that she had published about these similarities and how it might have happened if Tommy Lynn Sells did kill Joel. So it was actually a technicality that overturned Julie's conviction. So June of 2004, charges were refiled and she has a second trial. So at this point, the book had come out about Tommy Lynn Sells, and so the Illinois Innocence Project was involved, and they were taking a look at this. And so ultimately, they found a lot of holes in the story from the original trial. And Julie ultimately was found not guilty. She was innocent of this. And Tommy Lynn Sells was never convicted of the murder, but he was executed for the other murders that he was convicted for.
He was actually only executed for one murder.
Was it one murder?
He was only ever actually tried and convicted of one murder.
Right.
And malicious assault.
Yeah. So he was executed. So Julie spent some time in prison, but of course was ultimately found innocent, not guilty of the crime of killing her son. So yeah, a lot of tough things there, especially her son, of course, being murdered in the same house as her, and her having to go through all of that trauma all over again and defending herself for something she didn't do, and having to go through that multiple times through multiple trials. And thankfully, justice was served for her. And it's assumed here that Tommy Lynn Sells committed the murder. Of course, we don't know for sure, but it's assumed here. So maybe you can say justice wasn't necessarily served. They didn't find the murderer necessarily, but I think we can maybe assume that it was Tommy Lynn Sells.
There's a Texas law that says that an inmate on death row cannot leave the state of Texas. Many of the murders that are attributed to Tommy Lynn Sells that he confessed to, that he outlined, that he gave details that only the killer would know.
Right.
He was not able to be tried and convicted on because Texas wouldn't let him go to these other states. Illinois was one of them.
Yeah.
Like they weren't going to transport him outside of Illinois while he's on death row
Sure.
to stand trial for this murder. So he ultimately ended up only being convicted of the one murder. He had spent some time in jail prior to this, several times, but at least once for assault.
Yeah, so I guess he beat the system. He beat all his other charges. But in the end, it didn't work out for him after all. Yeah, so this case has an interesting kind of history. As you mentioned, Jeff, Lawrenceville, Illinois is where we are for this case. Population of just over 4,000, kind of a rural, semi-rural type place. This is a single-story ranch that Julie lived in. So Len and Julie, they got married when they were pretty young. He wanted to be a cop. He was 18. She was 17. Had to get permission.
Right.
And whenever you see a case where somebody has to get permission from their parents to marry, that's usually not the best sign. Getting married pretty young. And typically people that get married a little later do better.
Usually a sign that the relationship's just not going to work out.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, that's, you're not very mature at 17.
Right.
Or 18. Or early 20s, right? So it's kind of a tough sell. So when they were married, he went into law enforcement and she started working on a PhD in educational psychology, which I think she resumed later on.
Yeah.
They had the one son, Joel. The marriage failed. They divorced in 94. Len won physical custody in the summer of 1997. This was a contentious, acrimonious divorce.
Yeah.
Well,
Not a pretty one.
And Len had remarried, which is actually why he was able to get the custody, because it was the courts were saying, well, there's a 2-parent home versus a 1-parent home, so they chose to put Joel with the 1-parent. So this was, when this happened, this was like her last weekend with Joel, Julie's last weekend, like having him before his permanent custody would move into the hands of her husband, her ex-husband.
Yeah, so this kind of sets up the motive. This is a powerful, typically a powerful motive. At least juries feel that way. I'm not sure it matters as much as they thought, but I get it. Right? Everybody's upset. Divorce is difficult to navigate, especially with kids. Now, on October 12th, Joel was at his mother's house over the weekend, and it sounds like she asked for an extra day because Columbus Day was coming up. And, so this is, again, doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's one of those like, that's curious.
Yeah.
The day this happens is the day he shouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
So he wasn't feeling too well. She put him to bed, according to her. And she prepared for bed. She locked the front door, but she couldn't remember if she locked the back door.
Right.
And one report says the door to the garage. I don't know how those could be the same door, but I think it was the back door. That's the impression I got because he ended up in the backyard. We'll talk about him. Right. Julie went to bed at midnight, heard screaming at 4 a.m., woke up abruptly. And this was explained pretty well in 2020. This is a small house.
Yeah.
And like many ranchers, you have a bedroom in the front and a bedroom in the back, and there's a small area that separates them. In this house, it was really small. Like maybe 2 people could stand in there.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. She came face to face, so she says, with a man holding a knife who had just murdered Joel. The knife ends up right in that vestibule.
And Julie claimed at that point she didn't know where Joel was. And she didn't know that he was dead.
Right. Yeah, she didn't see him at that point. I don't know if she ever saw him, actually.
I don't think she did. I don't think she ever saw him.
She went outside.
She didn't see the blood either. Like she didn't.
She went outside thinking that he had been kidnapped.
Yes, this is an important part of her story. She only made it to the vestibule. That becomes pretty key when we talk about the blood transfer on her. So she says at this point, this guy's wearing a mask. She confronts this guy wearing a mask. Got the knife. They start to wrestle. They kind of wrestle through the whole house. One would think knocking things over, disrupting the house. And they end up on the grass where the intruder decides, this is a good time. I'll just take this mask off. Yeah. What was I doing with this anyway? What am I doing? Like, we're friends, right? Like, take that off.
Well, he apparently, he punched her.
Beat her, yeah.
And knocked her down and beat her. And then he stood up and took the mask off and started to walk away. And she got a look at his face. I think like at that point he might have thought that she was unconscious and or that he'd killed her and was comfortable with, okay, well, she's not going to see my face. But she did end up seeing his face. That was her claim to investigators when they arrived.
Now, if I remember correctly, I think he said that he had dropped the knife at some point before interacting with Julie, and that's why he didn't have the knife. Otherwise, I think he said he would have stabbed her, but he didn't have the knife. He had dropped it somewhere else.
Yeah, when they came face to face, he dropped the knife and tried to push past her.
Right.
And she was wrestling with him, and then like he kind of kept going towards the back door, and she was trying to restrain him or stop him or just like attack him in some way because it's an intruder in her home.
Because the jury in the trial, they would bring up the question, well, if he killed your son, why didn't he kill you? You know, like it felt like a hole to the people trying to poke holes in Jolie's story and show that she was guilty of this. You know, why would he only kill one person but not the other? And he had dropped the knife from his own admission. And I suppose, I don't know if he didn't expect her to come out and try to fight him or something. It wasn't clear to me why he would drop the knife. And maybe it was just he didn't know either. But
No fingerprints were found on that knife from anybody.
No. It was a steak knife too.
Yeah.
Didn't have that warranty, that guarantee.
No, they didn't have the guarantee. Yeah,
It was a steak knife from the butcher block in her kitchen.
Yeah. That's what investigators discovered. The knife was from her kitchen.
And that's another thing they would bring up in the trial that, why would a killer come in and not bring their own knife? You know, because that's the way everything works.
Yeah, they never heard of the Richard Ramirez case, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, apparently. Well, this is Illinois.
It's far away from
It's
Los
far
Angeles.
away from Los Angeles. Like nobody heard about the Night Stalker at that point.
So we see an unusual decision by the killer. You figure he's down for murder 1. And he also did that in the commission of a first-degree burglary. So he's in some serious trouble. Why leave a witness that you've already incapacitated and walk away? Well, like he ran away because he heard a siren. He walked away, took off the mask, kind of had a dramatic theatrical moment there as he's, well, who would do that? This is all issues that came up later on.
Right.
With some of the ways the investigators handled this case, he could have like tossed the mask just over his shoulder and walked away, and they wouldn't have found it. Like some other kid would have picked it up, or a squirrel just grabs it and takes it away. But the investigators, when they responded, police officers went into the house to check the house. They unfortunately found Joel deceased.
Yeah, before we get to that, another issue came up with Julie. So at this point, she gets up after being beaten in the face, and she runs to a neighbor's house. Says, call the police. But she made 2 comments with the neighbor that the neighbor just really, they got stuck on this. The neighbor was like looking him up and down, like because there was blood on Julie,
Right.
which there probably shouldn't have been based on her story, or at least not a lot. And Julie said, don't worry, I don't have AIDS. I don't know what she was really talking about there. It seemed out of place. She also said, I have a boo-boo on my knees. And she like pulled up her, whatever she was wearing.
And it seems really odd. And I will say, in Julie's defense, you can feel really loopy when you've just been hit in the head.
Yeah.
Right? But the investigators would talk about that as being part of her state of mind at the time after killing Joel.
You know, it's just like we've talked about with like the way that someone acts as the way that someone acts coming up in a trial and people trying to assign meaning to it, you know, and trying to understand or trying to paint this picture of what someone should act like at a moment when there's no precedent for, you know, as far as she knew, her child was maybe dead, had been taken by someone, or she really wasn't sure. So of course, there's no way to know what someone's going to act like, what they're going to say, what kind of potentially childish things they're going to come up with, because who knows where their mind's at. She just gotten hit in the head multiple times, and you know, it's of course we can look back on it and be like, who knows how she's going to act, after experiencing this level of trauma, not only physical trauma, but emotional trauma, she doesn't know what's going on with her child. After all the divorce things that have happened as well, all the trauma from that and just building off of each other, who knows how someone's going to act at that point? And there's just no telling. And I would hope that would be not admissible stuff in court, moving forward, as it was, the jury heard it in this case. But I would hope that those kind of things would be not allowed, because who could actually factually say, this is what someone should act like in a situation like this? And if they don't act like this, that means they're probably guilty. It's far-fetched, and it's a tough thing to actually make any meaning out of.
I agree. I've talked to people who have been through all sorts of trauma, and they never have the same story, the same reaction. The entire science of psychology is based on percentages, because there are percentages of a population is going to act in a way, and then there's portions of it that aren't going to act that way. And while 70% of people might break down crying in that moment, that means 30% are not. And you can't guarantee that any one person is going to be in either group.
Yeah, and what did she say specifically that indicated murder?
Right.
Is it like a boo-boo, a code that only police know? Uh-oh, she said boo-boo.
She said boo-boo.
She said
boo-boo.
Did you cause the boo-boo?
No, but at that point, when police arrived, and even to the neighbors, she said she was unsure where Joel was. She didn't know where he was. Mm-hmm. She was afraid he'd been kidnapped. So for what she was expressing, she didn't express murder at all. The thought that Joel was dead wasn't even present until the police told her that he was dead.
Right, they would find him between the bed and the wall. He'd been stabbed 12 times. So the Illinois State Police were brought in because local police, I guess they just didn't have the resources for a homicide investigation. This isn't particularly uncommon.
Right.
The town of 4,000. I mean, how many murders would they have? So here's what they found when they come through the house. They expected the house to be in disarray, but nothing was knocked down. There was no evidence of a disturbance. The knife came from the butcher block, talked about. We see this story that's fascinating with the glass.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
2 exterior doors, and the glass was on the outside. But then later on, we see that if you open the door fast enough, like if it breaks and you open it, when it hits whenever it stops, the glass comes out.
Right.
Well, the investigators were saying that since the glass was on the outside, that means it was punched from the inside.
Right.
It was broken from the inside. So she broke it with this. She came up with this cockamamie story about an intruder, and she was trying to stage it and broke the glass, but didn't do enough to make the house look in disarray, like she'd been wrestling through. And honestly, what it sounds like to me from her story isn't so much that they were locked like Godzilla and Mothra, just flailing and thrashing around, but that this intruder was walking down the hall and she kept trying to grab at him and he just pushed her back and kept walking. That's how he just ended up outside instead of like crashing through things.
Her MMA skills weren't up to snuff there.
No, like she didn't take him down and do the ground and pound. Like she didn't get him into a clinch and just like beat on him. Like she just kept trying to grab at him. Alternatively, she just broke the glass in the door and said, an intruder came in and killed my son.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense to me that you would, when you break glass, it's going to like spider first.
Right. And
not just fall out. Like windshields on cars or even side windows, like in doors, cars. They rarely just burst. Right. They crack, and then they get weaker, and then something pushes them over the edge. They can break either way. Mm-hmm. So if you're opening a door, just opening it, it stops, it hits the stop, glass flies out. And he could have broken it going on the way out, too. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
I think that's what it said, wasn't it? That he...
Well, they're not sure when that glass was broken, but that it was definitely on the outside of the door. So, it could have been that he broke it to get in, like made a small break to get in and turn the lock to go inside, and it was already broken. And then when he was leaving, the door came open and more of the glass shattered on the outside. It's also possible that as he was heading towards the door, kind of pushing Julie away, that he hit it and it broke as he was going out the door and then fell out when it hit the stop. That's like both of those are possible and plausible, but the investigators at the time said, no, the glass on the outside means that it was broken from the inside, because the idea of it being open at any point didn't occur to them.
Right.
It's kind of like, I get the impression that they just made points, but like nobody was buying it either way. You know, they were like, the prosecution made a point and they're like, this happened. And everyone's like, oh yeah, that happened. And just no one was like, no one either made a good counterpoint with it or was prepared to make a good counter. And they even said she had a public defender that just wasn't ready for a trial of this magnitude, didn't have the resources for it. The public defender, of course not. I mean, he's probably overworked and underpaid already.
The prosecutors played a little dirty pool on this particular case, because there was a precedent in Illinois set, a law that went into effect just before the trial started, that would have guaranteed Julie Ray a 2-person defense team paid for with federal funds, that would have made sure that she could have had the lawyer she wanted and an investigator on her side. But that was only available to people facing the death penalty. And after she applied for that, the prosecutors went, oh, we're not seeking death penalty, yanked it away from her. So that she had to go with a public defender because she didn't have any money. And that's messed up.
Yeah, it is.
But they had decided, like, one of the officers on the scene said, like, there's no way a struggle happened out here. The dew's not disturbed on the grass. That would have been a place for you.
I'm telling you, there's a need for it.
That would have been a place for you. They said the dew wasn't disturbed at all. How would somebody
find any footprints?
Couldn't find any footprints in the dew. Can't find any sign of her falling down in the dew. And other people testified that there were, like, later on said there was no dew on the ground that day, that morning. Like, there wasn't anything.
Due to the laws of physics.
Yeah, due to the laws of physics.
And that the weather patterns,
The temperature was too high.
Right. It just wouldn't even have allowed for dew at that time.
So
Our dew expert explains.
Telling you, this is a field that needs to be studied more. This could really break a lot of cases wide open.
Is it called Duology?
We're still working on it. We're in some struggles there with the soda company, with the name of the soda. So there's also a liquor company, I forget, Tulleman Dew or so. There's Dew in the name of many drinks apparently. So we're struggling a little bit with the copyright details, but we'll get there. Duology is a good one. We'll work on it.
Duality?
Duly noted. I mean, all of them are there. It's all there.
all right. So
It's your duty.
we see that. So what really hurt Julie here, next thing the police found, was the blood evidence. Right. She had a little bit of Joel's blood on the front of her shirt, whatever it was, blouse, and on the back, which just the investigators couldn't get past that. And it wasn't a lot. It wasn't like big blotches. It was talking about specks.
Yeah. I mean, almost trace amounts. Like it was kind of tough to see it from the pictures that I saw in there. I remember it kind of being like kind of tough to see the amount of blood that was on her shirt.
Right. And it's the investigators are saying that was spatter, that was cast off.
Right.
They're using their blood spatter analysis, which, as we all know, is a sacred science. And their claim was that when she was stabbing him, the blood was casting off the knife and onto her back, and it's the only way it could have gotten there, was if she was wielding the knife and spattering. But again, it's not like there's huge swaths of blood all over the front. It's small spotches on the front and a few small specks on the back, which are more easily explained by contact transfer from the intruder. But the police, the investigators at this point, they've in the first few minutes of the investigation have decided that Julie Ray did this.
Before they even did the analysis on the blood. But they did see a spatter on the headboard, the wall of the carpet, and a pair of shoes near Joel. So a dramatic
Significant
amount of
amount.
blood.
Yeah.
And yet she just had tiny specks that they had to find the lab. So they said that the attacker should have been covered in blood. So by their own description, how could Julie have been the attacker?
Yeah. But at trial, they would say the attacker should have had blood on her. Did her clothes have blood on it? And of course, the investigator would be like, yes, her clothes tested positive for Joel's blood. But they wouldn't obviously have told the jury.
They didn't elaborate too much.
They didn't elaborate too much and be like, yeah, the spots were like this big and it should have been like a red shirt.
I think one theory was that, they didn't explicitly say this, but I think one theory was that she had something else on. Because they searched all over the place to find more blood, like in drains and other places in the house.
They emptied the septic system, I think they said.
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems clear to me that they believed that she either had something on or she washed something, like she had something on that she washed, and the blood should have been in the drain. But then why leave on the other shirt? And how would it have been covered or had any marks on it?
I think they also tried to make the point that she put a blanket or a cover or something over him, or he already had it on him if he was sleeping, and that would have prevented it from going on her. But of course, all the other splatter everywhere else in the room. They also made the point about the knife, that it didn't have blood on it, or had very little blood on it, and if it had been dropped, you would have seen blood go out on the carpet.
Oh yeah,
But-
there was no blood.
So
spatter
she
on
said
it.
that it just, they said that she probably just, because she staged it, she just set it down instead of dropping it like the other narrative had
Oh,
been.
maybe it was one of my knives like that I would have been selling because those don't carry the fluid on them. So if they're dropped or set down, they don't create a spatter. But yeah,
Splatterproof coating.
Yeah,
That's big.
Yeah, it's that fluid proof coating. But yeah, the prosecutors they tried various ways to say this, like conflicting with their own reports. They're like, yeah, he was stabbed through the blanket, so the blanket would stop the
Would clean it. It was
would
a
clean it as it comes off. It would clean it as it comes
Self-cleaning
off.
knife.
But it's still going to cause this cast off that's going to cover her head to toe, and then this, there's no blood on the ground where she dropped it because it's going to be covered in blood after being wiped off by the blanket.
It was elaborate, I'll tell you.
It was very, very elaborate.
Apparently, this knife was discriminatory against blood that would go on her, but not blood that would go everywhere else. That was a smart knife, I'll tell you. I mean, as far as I can tell. Yeah.
Smart knife. That was the name of the product. Smart knife. It was smart.
This
knife.
was before smart products were big.
Yeah, it was.
It was before its time.
But again, Amazon kind of
Screwed the whole thing
killed
up.
the whole thing.
So Julie at first didn't recognize her legal peril. And she cooperated with the investigation. She told them about this intruder, and they showed it to people in the area. So the police kind of sounds like maybe a half-hearted effort. Like, oh yeah, have you seen this guy? Oh no, all right. Like, wait, I didn't. No, don't worry
see
about
it. Okay.
So
said no.
have you seen this guy? No. You haven't seen this guy? No. Haven't seen it? Have you seen this guy? No. Didn't see it.
Yeah.
But apparently a couple of people did.
Yeah.
They were like, yeah, I saw that guy.
The options underneath the picture were, have you seen this guy? Maybe and no. There was no yes. That was
I
the
was like,
problem.
have you seen this guy? Call 1-800-NO.
1-800, we're not going to answer. Yeah.
But yeah, there were a few people, including a ticket saleswoman at the bus station.
Right, and she sold a ticket to a man that matched that description. He was headed to Nevada.
Yeah, Winnemucca.
Now the police, right, a very unusual
I just
reference.
like the name, Winnemucca.
Yeah, like a very, not a big place that just happens to be
Right.
where another person committed a crime
Right.
that may be connected to this case. So the police actually did go after the bus. They intercepted the bus after it stopped in St. Louis, and they couldn't find the guy. It never occurred to them that he could have exited the bus.
At any other point along there. Yeah.
So at that point, now there was another witness later on we can talk about in a diner, but at that point, that's all they knew. They had the bus ticket person, they chased down the bus, and they're like, yeah, he wasn't there, so that means that Julie must have did it.
There's nobody on the bus, so the ticket lady's she's either screwing with us or she was wrong. So there's no insurance. This guy doesn't exist. So, but they took them 3 years to get what they had, which was all purely circumstantial, in front of a grand jury.
Well, it was a new prosecutor, as you mentioned before. That's all it was. There was no new evidence. If anything, witnesses' memories would kind of wear out over time, right? So they had a worse case years later. But this is how it works. A new prosecutor comes in, and they look at these cases and they think, I can grab a free conviction just by proving that my predecessor was terrible and didn't want to pursue a case. And actually, this particular prosecutor was correct. Not in the terrible part, but then there was a conviction to be had.
Yeah. After completely screwing her over for representation, and she ended up with a single public defender. And public defenders, no matter where they are overworked and get very little time to spend on cases. He had no capital crime experience at all, versus 3 prosecutors.
Yeah, public defenders, they do good work.
They do.
Right? But it's not their fault. They're awful because of the caseload they have to deal with. You hear stories where they literally, they show up in the court, and that's the first time they meet.
Yeah, right.
It's like the first time they ever look at the case.
Yeah, the first time they're able to look over the case. Like, okay, this Mr. Simpson? No? Oh, right, Bouvier. Mr. Bouvier. We're here for... Oh, my. That's a lot of charges.
I should have looked at this.
I should have looked at this beforehand. I knew it was thick. But yeah, sometimes that is the case. That's not an exaggeration. That's things that actually happen.
Yeah. And they're notorious for plea deals, right? I mean, it becomes almost a joke where you meet your public defender and they're like, so what are we pleading guilty to today?
Well, it's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why 95% of cases end in conviction. Why there are prosecutors out there who have a 100% conviction rating because they plea everything. They don't go to trial.
Prosecutors are overworked too.
They are.
Right? So private attorneys, in a sense, are kind of their enemy because you get these high-paid defense attorneys that push to a jury trial. That takes your resources way down for other cases. So prosecutors love public defenders.
But if this is a capital case, it really should be. But this is where the contentious nature of the system comes in. The adversarial version of it is that's a chess game at that point. And it's like, oh, she wants to bring in private attorneys with funding and time. No, we're going to block that. We're going to stop that from happening because we want to get this conviction, without thinking about maybe she didn't do it.
Well, they're not concerned with that.
No.
Yeah.
I've told you guys before that at a previous job I worked with people that had to go to court, family court, for concerns about abuse and neglect and things like that, Division of Family Services type things. And the number of, it was usually the same attorneys that worked these cases. So I saw a lot of them repeatedly. And it was the same exact thing that the client would try to call them repeatedly, and either they wouldn't get back to them or wouldn't get back to them in any amount of timely fashion. And again, not because they didn't want to, but just overworked and all that. And so it was often the case that they would show up and, meet them for the first time and maybe have a few minutes in the room, before the court hearing, just to kind of get everything straight and in line. A lot of it, it wasn't, they didn't really have anything to put out there, any kind of facts that they had to get right or anything like that. But the court hearing was to determine if they were doing enough to get their child back in their custody, more often than not. That's a pretty big deal, right? To all the people who are experiencing that, that's a huge deal. That's their whole life, practically. And to only be able to spend a few minutes with their attorney, and the attorneys did a great job. I mean, by and large, they did a great job defending their client and giving the best case and doing everything they could. A lot of it, of course, was up to the client, what they had to do before the trial, before that hearing. So a lot of it was up to them and what they did or didn't do. But they did a great job given the few minutes that they had with the client. But I was always amazed how hard they tried with such little time and preparation and all of that. Many of these clients didn't have the resources to get their own attorney, of course. It's just kind of demographic that this kind of thing happens with, of course. But it's not even just criminal stuff. It's across the board family law type stuff. And it's a shame because these are big decisions. These are big things that affect a lot of stuff in people's lives. And it gets to the point with many people that, from my experience, that they just kind of become apathetic towards the whole thing. Not because they don't love their kids, of course, but because they anticipate that they're going to get screwed over somewhere because they've been through it, seen it with other people. They have neighbors that have the same things happened. And the systemic issues of that play out time and time again, and they just become apathetic. And then inevitably, the view of them is, well, they don't care about their kids anyway. Well, that's not true. It may appear that way, but they've been beaten down so much by these things they've experienced, their neighbors have experienced. And it's a shame because there's not really an end in sight for it because they don't have the resources to do anything differently. Of course, the client doesn't. And so it's a shame. It's these big decisions that come down to just, do you have a lot of money or not? And of course, the answer is going to be no more often than not. They even said in this, when the Innocence Project came in, I think they said that it would have cost something like $1 million to have the kind of representation she needed to prove her innocence. Not many people have $1 million to spend on that, spend on anything. And it's a shame. It's another systemic problem that affects a huge amount of someone's life. And just, it's very difficult to make any progress with that.
Yeah. I mean, all kind of public lawyers, public attorneys, they do have the problem of huge caseloads because there are a lot of people who just cannot afford to pay an attorney because attorneys charge hundreds, if not thousands of dollars per hour to work on your case. And if it goes to trial, talking about 2 weeks, 8 hours a day in that courtroom, that's tons of money. And the public officers just don't have that much. They don't have that mentioned array of resources. They're not charging the clients, or the state is charging them minimal amounts and court fees. But because they don't get paid a lot, they don't draw in a lot of people to work there. So you have a public defender's office with like 20 or 30 people maybe in a big city for a given area. And each one of them has like 400 cases. And if you have to go to a jury trial because your defendant, the person you're defending, wants to take it all the way to trial, and you have to sit in a jury trial for a week, you've got to hand off 399 of your cases to all of your coworkers for the entire time that you're in that trial. And you can't say how long that trial is going to take.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons they push to plea. Plea, because if we plea it all down, we can get it out. I can get this case off my desk, regardless of the fact that it ends up screwing people over, because they plead guilty to something that they may not have done.
Just to get out of jail.
Just to get out of jail. Just to get just probation. Well, just probation, but you've pled guilty, and sometimes it's guilty to a felony, and guilty to a felony can keep you from getting a job.
Yeah.
And that can be a big issue. Or guilty to a felony could end up losing a professional license of some sort. Even if you didn't do something, you're agreeing to end your life and livelihood for at that point for any way of life that you had before.
Yeah, without the evidence ever being tested.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we see that, as you mentioned, Jeff, before, the trial did not go well for Julie. In addition to the evidence we talked about being presented, she didn't testify because her public defender told her not to. Now, usually it's a good idea not to testify, but in self-defense, or not in self-defense, but in a case like this with a mystery intruder, in self-defense cases as well, but with a mystery intruder, especially looking at the evidence, it's kind of not solid. Seems like a good opportunity to kind of tell an impassioned story. I mean, she was the one who lost her son.
And she wanted to. She wanted to tell the story on the stand. But the attorney said, don't. The prosecutor will twist your words and make the jury believe what he wants them to believe. And the problem was the prosecutor was already doing that.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I mean, it was one item after the other, and there was nothing except, defense could do is say, well, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean anything. The jury wanted to hear from her.
Yeah. And like the jury, the defense attorney couldn't even point to anyone else and say this was the other person who could have done it, because at that point it was a mystery, and we have no idea. So he couldn't even really say, well, somebody else broke into the house and did it. I mean, you could put that out there, but where's the backup to that? or how you're backing up your words to poke a hole in the prosecution's case. I mean, the only real thing that he did was for the defense was one of Julie's friends testified and said, she invited me over to the house that night. I couldn't go, but she invited me over. Why would she do that if she was planning on killing him? Like, why would she invite me to come over and spend the night if she was planning on killing her son?
Yeah.
And that was the prosecutor's whole thing, was that she killed him to keep him from going with his father, growing up with his father, or with a whole mentality of, if I can't have him, nobody can. Right. And they even went so far as to get testimony about how she had, when she first found out she was pregnant with Joel.
That was Len.
Len testified that when she, her ex-husband at that point testified that when she was pregnant with Joel, first found out she was pregnant with Joel, she discussed getting an abortion. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if she obviously she didn't, because he was 10 years old when he was murdered. But that right there, I think, convicted her.
Well, if you look at
in that county,
if you look at the demographics, it was very county specific, because Illinois tends to be kind of, if you count Chicago as a major influence, kind of liberal, right? Yeah. And I think it's liberal overall.
But Wayne County,
but that particular county was very conservative.
Very, very conservative. Like I think one of the things I read on one of the sites was 2004, when Barack Obama was running against Alan something, I don't remember.
I forget his name.
For representative, overall, Obama won 70% of the state. Mm-hmm. But Wayne County, 72% went to the other guy. And the only major difference between their policies is the other guy, they were both black candidates. So the only major difference between them was their policies on abortion. Mm-hmm. And the other guy was clearly pro-life. And Obama has some very pro-choice views. And that was the major difference. And the demographic was 72% of Wayne County was behind him. Mm-hmm. Very conservative county.
Yeah, the jury was shocked by Len's testimony. Mm-hmm. And it certainly seemed like a major factor.
Julie also came from, if I remember correctly, a very religious family. I think they're either her parents or both their parents were missionaries, or maybe it was just her parents, but a very conservative, maybe not very, but a conservative family. So I imagine that was a pretty difficult thing for her to consider, and she must have been in a pretty bad place to consider that, given her background and where she came from. And I imagine that among other things, I'm sure, but probably led to a lot of the issues in their marriage as well, that they had a certain background, or at least she did, but then would consider something like an abortion and so forth. So I'm sure that I can only imagine the kind of turmoil that they were experiencing at that point. But then, of course, for Len to testify against her, must have just been, just terrible. Obviously, there's issues in the marriage, but for him to go up and say, just bring her down that much more, and just not believe that she would be innocent in this, and believe that she would actually murder their son, would do a lot. I would imagine a jury thinking, well, they were married for a while, and he would probably know her best, and if he thinks that she did it, I imagine that would sway things pretty well.
Alan Keyes, by the way, was the man that Barack Obama was running. That was the 2004 U.S. Senate race in Illinois. And most of what Keyes ran on was his pro-life views on abortion. Right. And that was what won 72% of the popular vote in Wayne County. But I hear the jury hearing the ex-spouse testify that, I think that she murdered him, or that she's capable of it. That's going to go a long way. Right. And then hearing in a place where very conservative views on abortion, hearing that she contemplated this, I think right there that weighed the scale. That was a thumb on the scale already. And then just everything else was very emotionally charged.
Yeah, if she had testified, she could have refuted that idea that she wanted him to not be alive at some point. So she didn't get a chance to do that.
Yeah, that could just be, I'm not sure exactly how this would actually work, but from my view, that would just be hearsay at that point. Like, how could anybody prove what Julie wanted to do at that, when she was pregnant, other than him just saying it? And of course, that's going to be taken as fact unless there's other evidence, unless there's another testimony to counter that. And you're right. Julie could have just said, no, I never wanted that. And how could anybody know any different? But she wasn't given the chance.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, like the weight of 10 years of time going by, I'm going to change people. Like at the beginning, I just found out I'm pregnant. I don't know what's going on, what's going to happen in life in general. Is it something I should consider? No? Okay, then I'm not going to, and move on. And 10 years later, to have that conversation used against you is...
Yeah, they were reaching.
Really, they were really reaching. Yeah. But in the end, on March 4th, 2002, Julie was convicted of Joel's death.
65 years.
And sentenced to 65 years in prison. And it was May 31st, 2002, when the 2020 episode aired, her story. And she did that episode from in prison. She filmed her part of it because she wanted to tell her story. Mm-hmm. Because she didn't get a chance to in front of the jury.
Yeah, so that true crime author connected it to Tommy Wiseau's.
Yeah.
And here was the evidence. So this seems like a stretch, right? Like, okay, a lot of people write books on true crime and serial killers.
Yeah, I don't know anybody who's ever done that.
Yeah, who would do such a thing?
Who would write a book on true crime?
People were not happy that you used your book as a
yeah, I was thinking of that. Yeah, my 2 serial killer books as...
who would write a book like that? Like, I don't know.
Fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter. Who would do that?
Who would do that?
Yes, you figure, there are a lot of people who write those books. And, okay, you think, all right, this one author is like, oh, that's somehow connected to me. Seems a little like, was the universe spinning around her? But actually, she had a good point.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that caught her attention was that question the prosecutors had of what kind of intruder would break into a house to murder somebody and not bring their own weapon with them, which was actually something she'd heard quite a bit while corresponding with Tommy Lynn Sells. Because that's something that he would often do. Mm-hmm. He was a very impulsive killer.
Not bringing a weapon,
yeah,
and attacking children.
Yeah,
something that is uncommon, those two, and she sees a similarity and acts on it.
Yeah. So she hears about this. She's been corresponding with him, and he's been in prison at that point for years.
The ceramic duck incident.
Yeah,
yeah, where actually he got hit with the duck. He got hit with a ceramic duck when he attacked a woman after getting a knife in her kitchen. Kind of talked his way into her house and assaulted her, and then she hit him with the duck. And after that, he would not attack adults anymore.
It's not every day that we get to talk about ceramic ducks.
And what are they good for? Well, here you say
apparently
attacking serial killers.
They're good for attacking serial killers. Now that woman, her name is Fabian Witherspoon. Mm-hmm. She was actually in the more recent 2020 episode talking about this incident. She'd seen him on kind of panhandling underneath a bridge and invited him back to her friend's apartment so that she could give him some food, maybe some clothes. And she said, "Wait here outside." She went inside, and he just followed her in and grabbed a knife out of the butcher block and threatened to do horrible things to her. Pushed her into the bathroom, and she saw a ceramic duck, and the thought in her head was, well, if you hit somebody over the head with something ceramic in the movies, it knocks them out. So that's what she was going for. So she smacked him in the head. It didn't break, so she smacked him a few more times and finally broke it. And then they wrestled for the knife. She ended up stabbing him in the gut several times. Mm-hmm. He finally, he ended up smacking her with a piano stool and knocking her out. And by that, people had heard the commotion. And there was law enforcement responding. And he ran away. She got help from the hospital. But they caught him because his wounds were bad enough to send him to the ICU as well. Mm-hmm. But that's not actually why he was in prison when Diane Fanning was corresponding with him. He was there for murder.
Oh, there's another crime that had him in there.
Yeah, he was there for the 1999 slaying of a 13-year-old girl in Texas, and the attempted murder of a 10-year-old. I think it was a 10-year-old girl as well. They were friends. He had broken into that house through a window. He had assaulted the 13-year-old girl, stabbed her many, many times. And this is where the other 2020 episode comes into place, because it's all about the survivor. She was amazing. The episode was Live to Tell, surviving victim of a serial killer. Caitlin Harris was a 13-year-old girl who was murdered. And Crystal Searles was the name of the other girl. And they were it was bunk beds. And Crystal woke up to noises, and she kind of froze and watched, saw him, and he stood up and went to leave and almost didn't see her until he kind of paused to take one last look around, and he saw her eyes were open. So he just coldly reaches up with a knife and slits her throat and walks away. But it didn't get deep enough to immediately to be like fatal. Close enough. It did nick her trachea, but it didn't hit any of the major arteries or veins. And she climbed out of the bed, and it's very heart wrenching to hear. But she rubbed her friend's back until she realized that her friend had passed. And then she didn't know if anybody else in the house was alive. She thought that he had done the same thing to everyone else. So she left the house and went to her nearest neighbor, which was a quarter mile away, holding her throat because she was bleeding. And she told them through writing, because she couldn't speak at that point, that somebody had murdered her friend, and that she wasn't sure about the rest of her family, and to call 911 and call the police. And she even wrote, "Am I going to die?" As a question. She went to they got her to the hospital. They got her surgeries. She made a quick comeback, and she gave a description of Tommy Lynn Sells that had him arrested within days. And then he was brought in. U.S. Marshal sat down and interrogated him, and he confessed to everything. And then he confessed to other murders. And that U.S. Marshal would talk about how they could corroborate 22 other murders.
Wow.
But again, he was on trial in Texas, so they wouldn't send him to these other states just in trial. And then once he was convicted, they gave him the death sentence, and he couldn't leave the state. So they were never able to charge or convict him of any other crimes. But they're pretty sure, based on his confessions and corroborating evidence, that he did at least 22.
It's amazing what she did. All the things that people are capable of during the most horrible moments of their life. A throat slashed, and your friend's dead. She thought maybe her family was dead as well. Walking a quarter of a mile, holding her throat that's bleeding. She could have easily died. And the amazing things that people are capable of in those horrible moments, that just adrenaline takes over, or whatever it is that kept her going. And the number of lives that she probably saved just from doing that, so that he got off the streets and couldn't kill anymore, ultimately. And that's amazing.
I think she said in that 2020 episode, because I just watched that, I think it was earlier today. And it's really good, because I wanted to learn more about Tommy Lynn Sells. And I had seen that episode years ago. It aired in like 2011 or something like that. And so I watched it back then. So I knew the story. It just had been a while, and I kept hearing the name, and it was like ringing a bell until I rewatched this episode. But she said it was almost harder for her to testify against him than it was to actually go through the events. Like that part, again, adrenaline's pumping. She doesn't have time to sit and contemplate what's going on. But sitting in the stand, sitting on the witness stand, and he's right there. And then she said he wouldn't even look up at her. He's right. She couldn't handle it. She broke down. They had to call a recess so that she could collect herself. But then once she actually started talking, she kind of got over that real quick, and then she was clear and concise on everything that happened. And the jury sort of, oh yeah, we got to get this guy off the street. And so that's why he was in prison. He was in prison for the murder of Caitlin Harris and the attempted murder of Crystal Searles. And because he'd confessed to all these other murders, that's what it caught Diane Fanning's attention. Because, well, here's a serial killer. And he was a cross-country killer. And he was always impulsive.
You just walk into houses, break into houses. Yeah, highly irregular, right? You see somebody, again, like Richard Ramirez, who did that in a local, like in one area, mostly in Los Angeles. But to wander across the country and do it, man, that's not typical.
But he had spent 5 years in prison because of the ceramic duck incident, and gotten out and had been wandering around, and apparently had committed several other murders. Diane Fanning had heard his stories enough that one detail about not having a weapon when entering the home, that stuck out to her.
Amazing.
Yeah, so he confessed to murdering Joel, right? He said he did it. But the problem was corroboration. There had to be somebody who said other evidence that pointed to the same thing. Yeah. You can't just take his word for it to overturn a conviction, although you could argue that you should, but because he did had apparently a high number of legitimate confessions.
But that's also a thing in Texas. Texas law says you can't convict based solely on confession either. Like they can't even bring it to trial based solely on confession. They have to get corroboration, which has been a problem in other cases that I follow. Really amazing. But his confession wasn't enough. But then when he was asked to actually put that on the record in court, he recanted.
Right. He recanted. And in the meantime, we see you had this bus ticket witness we talked about. We couldn't positively identify him, but the person was going to Winnemucca.
Winnemucca.
And he had committed a crime there. So it was known that he had committed a crime there. So that seemed to connect him. And there was another witness who encountered Tommy Winsell's, or maybe somebody met his description, in a diner not far from Julie Ray's ranch, her ranch house. And I guess Tommy was talking to his son and said, "I bet you're afraid of me," and was laughing. Just a generally creepy, weird encounter that you would remember.
Right.
He saw the guy walking down the railroad tracks toward where Julie's house was. Yeah. So that seems corroborated.
A couple of things that Tommy Winsell told Diane Fanning. Like she mentioned the line from the prosecutor, but didn't mention anything else about the case.
Right.
About Julie Ray's case to Tommy Winsell. But his response was, "Oh, about that case with that woman convicted of killing her son. Was that on a couple of days before the killing I did on this one day? Maybe was that on the 13th?" And he'd already confessed and talked about a murder he'd done on October 15th.
15th, yeah.
And Joel was killed on the 13th. And that was information that hadn't been made public to him, or hadn't been led to him by Fanning. And other details that he came to, like he mentioned at another point that he had been in Lawrenceville and that he decided to go after this woman because she'd been rude to him in the grocery store. And he followed her home and waited and then broke in and killed the kid for her being rude. Mm-hmm. And then he also mentioned how they had a tussle in the hallway and that he beat her out in the backyard and then left.
Yeah, specifically he said backhand, which is what she had described.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's pretty good corroboration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so... but, it was a technicality. A special prosecutor had been appointed, which violated some rules.
There was also a Brady violation.
Oh, was there?
Yeah, there was a Brady violation. The prosecutors had not turned over a recording of one of the principal investigators talking to their supervisor about a piece of evidence, like and it was there's like, this isn't corroborated. We don't have any corroboration of this evidence, and that recording, but that recording hadn't been turned over, and that recording was something that could have been used in her defense. So there's a Brady violation, and a special prosecutor had been applied when it shouldn't have been. So a couple of technicalities kind of made the appeals courts vacate her conviction.
Yeah, so she was tried again. They actually took this back to trial, even though the Tommy Lynn Sells thing occurred in the meantime. And she testified in her defense, and of course had the whole Tommy Lynn Sells. Like, she could bring it up, and really, her defense was just vastly superior to the one she had before.
Yeah, I mean, she had the Innocence Project behind her, funding the defense, plus with an actual name and a face to point at. The defense attorneys could be like, okay, this is the drawing that the police flashed around to people. Did you see that? Nope. You didn't see the guy? Nope. This is the drawing. This is Tommy Lynn Sells' picture taken, that same time period. They look really similar. And like, they just had to point at it. It's like Tommy Lynn Sells. And ultimately that defense worked.
Yeah, it prevailed. And about 3.5 years later, she received a certificate of innocence. So she's more than not guilty. She's actually innocent. And she was awarded $87,000 from the Illinois Court of Claims. Tommy Lynn Sells, 4 years later, would make his journey to the afterlife.
Yeah, he was executed.
Yeah. So, I don't imagine there's too many people these days that believe that Julie Ray is still guilty. I'm sure maybe the prosecutor does. Like, oh yeah,
There's at least one. Her ex-husband. Like,
Right.
He's still to this day will claim that she killed their son and got away with it.
Yeah, it's certainly possible, but it seems pretty. I mean, I think that Tommy Lynn Sells is a much better suspect.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah. His whole MO fits exactly what she described from the door.
Yeah. You think about these. I mean, this is a terrible thing. You're sleeping, kids sleeping, somebody comes in. It's kind of a nightmare. It's not a common way to die. Usually killers don't come into houses. That's, among all serial killers, that's actually pretty rare. But some do.
I can only think of three. Tommy Lynn Sells, Richard Ramirez, Golden State Killer.
Right. That was his whole deal.
Yeah, that was
Joseph D'Angelo.
Yeah, Joseph D'Angelo.
Yeah.
His whole deal was control. And that's a whole other episode.
Yeah, most serial killers work to kind of catch people in the open, lure people back to their residence, like a Jeffrey Dahmer type situation.
Pick people who won't be missed.
Yeah, sex workers,
Like
drug users.
Gary Ridgway.
Yeah,
Picking people who can easily be swayed into coming in to their territory, and it won't be missed right away.
Yeah, you don't see.
They're all eventually missed by someone. But
in Ridgway's case, there was one we were talking about. We did that video. It was like years went by before anybody even reported her missing. I mean, it's you start to think like, okay, if somebody gets killed by a serial killer, at least the police are going to know something's up because somebody's going to report them missing. Like, at least you have that.
Right.
With some of Ridgway's victims and others that we've looked at, they might not even be reported missing. So there's no crime as far as law enforcement is concerned. They have no idea.
The one thing that still does throw the question over this was the confessions from Tommy Lynn Sells before he was executed. He confessed before he was convicted. He confessed to 22 murders, and they were able to corroborate most of the details for some of them. After his conviction, when he was on death row, he confessed to a further 28 murders in various places. and very little corroboration was able to be found in some of them. And the prosecutors in Texas started looking at it as Tommy Linsell's gaming the system. Because every time he confessed to something new, they had to push his execution date back a little bit because they had to investigate. They had to see if they could find corroboration. Eventually, they just stopped taking his confessions and stopped letting outside sources come in. I mean, we had the problem with, what's his name earlier in the 80s? The one that confessed to like 100.
Oh, Henry Lee Lucas.
Henry Lee Lucas, yeah. Confessed to like 300 or something murders all over the country.
In Japan, he said.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah, I was in Japan. Like, have you ever been to Japan? No, but I killed somebody in Japan. But they were afraid that he was going to go that way. Mm. And so they were like, we're not taking any more confessions from him. He's on death row. That's what we're doing. And so the Julie Ray thing came up in the middle of that. Like, where the prosecutors were just like, no, anything he confesses to now is like, that's just him trying to get his execution date pushed back. That's just him gaming the system. And so some of the prosecutors still in Illinois are still like, no, we're pretty sure she did it. They didn't fight to not have her be declared innocent and be given a certificate of factual innocence, but they still have their opinions. Say Tommy Linsell's, like, that was a false confession, and she used it to get away with murder.
And it's possible. Ted Bundy also broke into a sorority house in Florida.
Yeah,
that was his last.
That's his last hurrah.
Yeah, he actually he offended there, and then I think there was another woman down the street, but it was in the same. Like he murdered a couple people, attacked a couple people, and went and attacked another woman who lived. So 5 victims, two died. He broke in. Yeah, I don't know if he ever did before though.
I don't think he had before.
I don't think that was his style. I think his style before was to trick women to come over to help him. He had like a fake cast.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he used trickery, and then he had one night of just like, I'm going to go nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he was ready to get caught, maybe. I don't know. And it's just figured. He had actually been hanging out with them at a bar or something not long before that and mentioned to somebody about like something happening. So he planned that. He also did not bring a weapon. He picked up a log. It was described as a log or a stick from the sorority house as he went in.
Yeah. Oh, Michael Morton case, the perpetrator actually did that. He picked up a piece of wood from there. And the other woman that he'd murdered that they were still trying to get him for, that was how they came around to him. He did the same thing with her, picked up a piece of wood before breaking into her house.
That was an intruder killer.
So yeah, what kind of intruder killer doesn't bring a weapon with them? Apparently a lot.
Mm-hmm. Like, the kind that kill people, apparently.
The kind that kill people with whatever they find there.
Yeah, so that's where Julie Ray's case ended. She is not guilty and actually innocent. Tommy Linsell's is dead, so who knows if he did it or not. Probably. I think he probably did. Mm-hmm. But I can see the point of law enforcement. I mean, there's still some inconsistencies at the scene. You never know.
Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. But, people don't deal well with uncertainty. So it's like, well, Tommy Lynn must have done it, or she must have done it. Maybe somebody else did it. Who knows?
Tommy Linsell's he seems like it seems like a convenient suspect, but he also seems like an accurate one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It fits with much of what he did.
Well, 2 witnesses described him there, and he said he was there.
Yeah, there's corroboration from witnesses putting him in the area. He says he was in the area. Her description matches him very, very closely. The details that he gives, unsolicited details that he gives that match exactly what happened, it gives a really good indication that he was present, mm-hmm. and that he did it. But amongst a bunch of other confessions that are dubious at best, there's some doubt. There's still some doubt that investigators, prosecutors might have. Mm. And her ex-husband is absolutely convinced that it's nonsense, from what I understand. I think that's what he said on the 2020 episode. Was that Tommy Linsell's nonsense? It was either him or one of the prosecutors said that line.
Yeah, it's tough when killers confess to, like, falsely confess. It's tough to use that to exonerate somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I think even without the whole Tommy Winsell's introduction into the scenario, I don't think she was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
You couldn't really put the knife in her hand. That's a problem, right? No fingerprints on the knife, nothing connecting her to the knife except it was in her kitchen. And, the motive seems very weak.
Yeah, and the likelihood that the blood that was on her shirt actually came from when cells would have been pushing her back or backhanding her. It was cast off of the gloves that he was wearing because his fingerprints weren't on it either.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the tech analysts showed in the 2020 episode. They were going over how the knife didn't leave any spatter on the floor. Mm. He said, well, one of the things that investigators have noticed over the years is that serial killers or killers who use knives regularly for attacks, when they're done, they'll often wipe it off on their pants and just quick wipe it off on their pants so there's no blood on the blade. Mm-hmm. And then if you dropped it at that point, there would be no spatter because the blade has been wiped off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then it doesn't need to have magically cleaned itself off and then gotten bloody again through the blankets and things like even though they couldn't match up any of the cuts on the blankets to any of the wounds on Joel. The investigators really couldn't. There were some cuts in the blanket, but they also weren't surrounded by lots of blood.
Which it should have been.
Which it should have been, especially if it was wiping the knife off. Mm-hmm. But I think it was 2 places there were some cut marks. And there was a little bit of blood in a different area of the blanket. So it's... I don't know, that might have been where he tried to stab and Joel rolled it first. And it went through and then he got him. But we'll never really know what happened in that room that night. Because the only person if Tommy Winsell's did it, the only person who actually knows what happened in that room was Tommy Winsell's, and he died in 2014.
Yeah.
And if Julie Ray did it, she's not going to tell anybody.
No, she never changed her story one bit.
Never changed her story.
Yeah. And if you look at the cases where the person ultimately is, we think they're guilty, they often do change their story.
Right.
They have a lot of time in prison to think, I should have said this instead of that. Mm-hmm. She never changed any of it, even the stuff that made her look bad. She stuck with that.
Right.
So,
I do think things about false confessions are very interesting. I think very often I was watching a 2020 Today about a person who falsely confessed to something he didn't do, and it was 20 years later when investigators really found out he didn't do it. And they found the person did it through genetic genealogy. It's a really, really fascinating one. But the prosecutors in that one were like, why would he confessed to the police? Why would he confess if he didn't do it? Innocent people don't confess.
Right, which isn't true.
Unless they're on death row or have been in prison for a long time and are just trying to get some notoriety because that's something that prosecutors have said about Edward Harold Bell. I think we're going to cover at some point. He confessed to at least 11 other murders than the one he was convicted for, even though he claimed until he died of cancer that he never killed anybody. But he was convicted of murder. And he spent decades in prison. Mm-hmm. This is a really interesting case. But he confessed and sent confession letters to prosecutors all over Texas. And the prosecutors are like, nah, he's just blowing smoke. He's just confessing falsely. And meanwhile, they'll turn around and look at somebody else like Jeff and be like, why would you confess if you didn't do it? Jeff's confessed to a lot of things.
A lot.
A lot of things.
I recanted all of them, maybe.
But a lot. I think there might have been 2 or 3 that you haven't recanted yet.
Yeah, I'm getting it.
When they catch up to you.
I just haven't written the letter, the recanting letter yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Confessing is a sure way to get convicted, right? It doesn't matter what other evidence is or is not there.
Because juries buy it.
They weight it very heavily.
Yeah. Why would he confess if he didn't do it? Well, because the police are allowed to do a lot of things,
including lie,
get you to confess.
Yeah,
they're allowed to lie. They're allowed to make up evidence to you. They're allowed to say they have evidence that they don't have or that doesn't exist. They're allowed to almost coerce you into things. And they're allowed to use leading questions.
And they believe they can read emotions into behavior. Like they have this magic ability to, oh, you said boo-boo, so that means that's code for, like I said.
Boo-boo's code for murder.
Or AIDS or whatever else she said.
She said AIDS and boo-boo? There's another body around here. It's code for multiple murder.
Yeah, the magical thinking of the police that's among the most disturbing to me. And nothing illustrates it better than the so-called polygraph. I can't get past. I mean, we talked about this before. Like there's scientific articles, one in particular that was the definitive. It was took a lot of different research in and reviewed it, and it said definitively the case is closed. They're nonsense, and that was it. That was it for we don't see new research trying to prove something that's already been proven. Mm-hmm. It's done. They don't. There's no reason to believe that they're accurate. The case is closed.
The only thing a polygraph does is measure stress reactions. That's it. Mm-hmm. Just measure stress reactions, and there's a ton of reasons that someone could be stressed. Mm-hmm. But the magical thinking amongst law enforcement and amongst people who watch Jerry Springer and Maury,
Phil McGraw, he loves those polygraphs.
And Steve Wilkos, like the magical thinking is that, well, you're only stressed by talking to cops if you're hiding something, if you're lying.
Only people that are hiding things are stressed.
No. Everybody's stressed when talking to the cops because it's an adversarial system. Mm-hmm. And, the more into certain demographics a person finds themselves, the more nervous and stressed out they're going to be just being in that presence.
I think for the police to use polygraphs, they should be taking one at the same time. They should send questions back and forth.
They take turns. I ask one, you ask one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Do a little quid pro quo, Clarice.
The funny thing is when federal law enforcement officers, they have to do polygraphs regularly depending on the agency and if they get in trouble. And when they get caught, they're always like, they don't work. I know, because I'm one of these guys. It's like, but you just said they did. But when you have to take it.
I'm a polygraph examiner. I know that these things don't work. It's like, well, of course you do. You're a polygraph examiner. You know they don't work. You just use, and this is the thing. A lot of law enforcement, if you call them on it, they'll be like, yeah, we know it doesn't work. But the people that taking them don't. And so we can be using that and leveraging that to make them, to get them to confess. They don't say make them. They say get them to. Get them comfortable with the idea of confessing. It's not the way it works. Is you're making them do something. It is a coercion tactic. It's dirty, and it's wrong because most of the time they don't go, oh yeah, you passed with flying colors, and let them go off on their merry way to just yeah, now we just wait.
If they wanted to be deceptive, they'd be better off telling people that they passed.
Yeah, no, they tell them, well, that was inconclusive. Or you lied. We know you lied. The polygraph told us you lied. And for some people, they're like, they get so confused and so stressed out by being in that situation that the thought comes into their head of, did I lie?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They start to doubt what reality is.
Right. They start to doubt what reality is. And then they start like okay, I'm going to try and give them whatever they need to get so that I can get out of here. So that I can get out of this stressful situation. And that's a big thing from anxiety. Anxiety will tell us to do anything and everything to get out of that situation because you're not safe. Because you're not feeling safe.
Yeah.
And the inconclusive label is just another way of saying lied in those situations because it's always the way it's interpreted. If it's brought up in front of the court of public opinion, because there's no courts that actually allow them to be introduced as evidence, but the court of public opinion says it came out inconclusive. He must have lied. He just found a way to, hide that. And they can tell. They can tell on those things.
Or if somebody refuses to take one.
Oh, polygraph examiners are, like, that is one of the things that they talk about in their training. Polygraph examiners are told one of the signs of deception is if a person tries to undermine the polygraph before taking it. If they try to say, these things aren't conclusive. Alarm bells should be going off in the polygraph examiner's mind. So then, let's say the examiner is a true believer in the polygraph, believes that it really does scientifically prove that someone is being false, which it doesn't. they're going to hear somebody like me say, I'm doing this under duress because I know these don't work. There's no scientific evidence, and we actually have scientific evidence that they do not work. If I say that sitting down in that chair, that examiner is automatically going like, he's trying to weight the test already. He's trying to say any indication of falsehood is negative. That he's trying to flip it around so that he can lie on this and not get out. So I've got to look really hard for those deceptions. And then he's going to be like circling things on the, like as the paper comes reading, he's like circling these peaks and things, which of course is a tactic to make you feel more nervous. Because if he's doing something, and I know that from being a therapist, right? It's why I don't take notes. Because the last time I took notes on a piece of paper for a client, I had the pen, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a couple of notes here. In the middle of the thing, I'm starting to write, and it's like, what are you writing? Like starting to get nervous, like their head keeps coming up. So I'm like, I don't take notes in the middle of a session. Like I might jot a few things down afterwards, but I don't pick up a pen and write anything during a session because I notice that people get nervous. They see you writing something and they can't see it. Polygraph examiner sitting there writing things down. The subject gets nervous, which then just makes the needle jump even more, and they start doing it more. Oh, you failed. What? All I said was that my name is Michael Smith. That's not a lie. Wait, is it a lie? Maybe that's not my name.
And you're doubting reality.
Yeah, and you're doubting your reality.
I can't not take notes, and I make sure to explain it as often as I can. Like, I'm going to be typing, and it doesn't mean anything. I'm just trying to remember what you said and trying to make sure I connect things throughout the session. And I can't not do it that way because then I miss details inevitably. And but I also understand like being present, of course, and you guys know the struggle there, being present, but also making sure the notes are detailed enough. And yeah, it's that's a difficult part of what we do.
Yeah. And connecting all the past experiences, like looking for themes and bringing that in, can seem like you're distracted.
Right.
Because they say something, you're like, they've done that before. That reminds me of something there. So you can look through the chart and say, oh, they've reported, drinking this way before or whatever. Or like a certain person that they reference.
Right.
And like you can look for it. Although anymore, charts are electronic. Yeah, for the most part. So, all right. So that's the case with Julie Ray. I don't think anything is going to happen with it. All the players seem to have a final disposition.
Yeah, I think it's pretty settled at this point.
Mm-hmm. Cautionary tale about how we have to be comfortable with uncertainty. There's no way to know what happened exactly, and that has to be okay.
True crime writers watching true crime shows can solve real life cases.
True crime writers are important, not only for the books or things that they write, but obviously in a case like this, not many people would have seen those connections, would have known Tommy Lynn Sells well enough to understand how he did things, why he did things, and connected the doubt of a prosecutor to something else that he had done. The average person that was watching a news story wouldn't have thought about that. And if they did, they wouldn't have had a thought solid enough or basis solid enough for it to take it further. And so it probably brings up the point that she had to spend a lot of time researching and corresponding with him to get to that level of really knowing him to that kind of depth. And not many people are able to take the time to do that, let alone even the representation that Julie had. Like that, the public defender couldn't have known her well enough to, known the case, well enough to understand. Maybe there's other people that have done things like this. Certainly not. So it's an interesting thing. That's a connection that isn't often made. I don't know if it's ever been made other than in this case, but it's an interesting thing that there's people with knowledge that could really help change the trajectory of somebody else's life.
I just hope that at some point in the future, some intrepid triad of true crime podcasters are able to help with a real case. Not anyone in particular, just something, some random three true crime podcasters somewhere out there.
That those random three contributed
They
positively
might
to the
yeah,
world.
contributed
Maybe.
positively
Yeah.
to the resolution of a case.
There you
It'd
go.
be interesting.
There you go.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this case that really is systemic. I've mentioned systemic stuff before. There's systemic problems. It's the adversarial nature of things. Investigators and prosecutors, as much as our system is supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, investigators and prosecutors, they get a quote-unquote head start at seeing the proof. They form their narrative looking at that evidence, and then they try to convince somebody else of it. And that's really all it is, trying to convince somebody else. Now, sometimes that thing is the truth. Other times, like in this case, it's the narrative that they wanted it to be. They didn't want it to be. It's too scary for it to be just a random guy breaking into the home and taking a knife from in that home and stabbing. Who would do that? That's because it's too scary. It's too big to look for a serial killer like that, just based on this one thing. It's a lot easier to wrap your head around. The mother did it because she was mad at the father. She didn't want to lose the custody of her son. She was mad with grief, and that's where the AIDS and the boo-boo comments, she went out of her mind at the last minute.
There's a massive automatic bias against a spouse, parent, even a son or daughter. When there's a situation with like a closed system or a theoretically closed system and somebody dies. Right? The idea of an intruder coming in, or even just like a spouse dying out in the world when you can't find the other spouse. Were they at work? What were they doing? They went shopping that day? They never go shopping. Like everything's examined.
They were at work, but then they were gone for 15 minutes and they had access to this chemical that we found in the system. Like, that's a real case. But yeah, they're looking for that. And that's what there's an inherent bias in the investigator's minds, an inherent bias in the prosecutor's mind. And sometimes even in the defense attorney's minds, especially public defenders, when you work with so many people who actually are guilty, you start to see a trend. Mm-hmm. And then your biases take over and say, well, these people are really guilty. And there are people who are really guilty who walk in and say, oh, public defender, what can you get me reduced down to? It's not always just the public defender going, what are we pleading to today? Sometimes it's like, what can you get my charges dropped down to? Because I did a thing. And I know I did the thing. What can you get me reduced to so I can get out? Mm-hmm. And when you work with enough people like that, you start to become jaded. And your biases come into play. It's like, well, this is another guilty person sitting in front of me that I have to defend. Mm-hmm. And the defense is going to be trying to minimize the damage that they've done. Or the damage that could be done to them by the system. And it becomes really problematic. It's not innocent until proven guilty anymore. It's guilty until proven innocent in many ways. And
I think some countries, that's the setup, right? Not the U.S., but some countries it is there's a guilty to proven innocent. Sometimes, it feels that way here too, even though presumption of innocence, I mean, that's not for law enforcement, right? They don't look at it that way. No. And the state doesn't.
Most of the time, the law enforcement, we get the bad guys. No matter who the bad guys is, and some of them stick to it. Once they have convinced who the bad guy is, that's the bad guy. Michael Morton case was a great example. The prosecutor in that case to this day still says Michael Morton did it.
Even there's another
he's
guy
factually innocent. Another guy's been convicted of it. The DNA evidence proved it. No, I'm not wrong. Mm-hmm. He did it because it's so invested in it.
Right.
And in that bias and that narrative that they've created for that particular case and don't want to admit being wrong. And some people, they get so involved in the office, especially in prosecutor's office, the prosecutor's office can't be wrong. Mm-hmm. So it might have been 3 district attorneys ago when something happened, but no, I'm not going to let that go because this office isn't wrong. And the sanctity of it has to be upheld. Well, you know what? People get things, the system is made of people, and people get things wrong all the time.
They also believe in the finality of a verdict.
Right.
But they still bellyache when there's not guilty verdict.
Right.
It's like, well, and that is final, right? That jeopardy attaches. But this victims don't feel comfortable unless the wrong person stays in prison forever. How does that make any sense?
How does the wrong person staying in prison
right.
make sense? Let's get the right person in prison for it. You know, the old saying, "Justice delayed is justice denied." I'm not sure I believe that in every single case, because I think that even if it takes a while, once we have it, we have it, and that delay is while it's being delayed, it's being denied. But once we reach the finale, we have it. But rush to judgment is worse.
I mean, it's almost inevitable that there'd be some kind of delay, given all the factors that people experience in cases like this or any other case. I mean, it just takes time to understand it and get all the evidence gathered and things like that. And it sucks. It sucks that there needs to be a system in place to prove innocence and guilt, and that these things even happen. But they do, unfortunately. And we have a system. It's not perfect, of course, but there's delays and there's bad things that happen. But thankfully, there's good places, good people out there, and good agencies like Innocence Projects and so forth that really make it their life's work to make sure that justice is served, make sure that people have a fair trial, that they have fair representation, that they have people on their side that can actually help them. Of course, not in every case, but thankfully there's, and I don't think I'm mistaken on this, but I think one of the things that attorneys are required to do is give up a certain amount of their time pro bono and represent somebody pro bono. I think it's required by, maybe it's state specific, but I think it's required by many bar associations that they have to give up some time. Obviously, like you said, Mike, the cost of an attorney is prohibitive for many, many people. So that kind of thing, that kind of free representation, or at least legal advice, is available and required, I think, for many attorneys. Yeah.
Sometimes high-profile defense attorneys will take a case to market, to build up like their advertising potential and their appeal.
We're taking this case, no charge, pro bono, because it gets them juice. It gets a like, wow, that's this really high-powered attorney really helping out. But I think you're right. I think it's professional organizations that sometimes to maintain your membership, you have to give a certain number of hours.
Yeah, maybe that's it.
Of pro bono time. I don't think there's any legal requirement for pro bono time, but that could vary state to state. Sure. And I've never been through law school and tried to be a lawyer at the bar. I've never claimed to. So
I'm gonna make a reaction video to you.
Don't know.
Better be careful.
I've never claimed to be a lawyer.
So let's take a look. So that's the case of Julie Ray. Let's take a look at some of the questions that have come in. Yeah. We get quite a few, so we will address 5 or 6 of them now, and we'll do another question part because we do at this point we're trying to get to every one. In the future, we may not be able to. We'll try to do our best.
Mm-hmm. So we got 4 questions today. First one of my favorite questions by far so far. Consider the question what and what in detail. And the difference there, first one is W-A-T, second one is W-U-T. And in particular, the spelling, use of punctuation or no punctuation, and the implications of all of that combined. Super deep question. The world is, of course, dying to know. W-A-T versus W-U-T.
What?
That's right. You got it, Mike. You got it. That's exactly it.
I think that is the answer to the question. I think that's like the philosophy, like the big philosophy quiz, and the professor says why, and the student says why not.
Brilliant, A+.
Yeah, right. You win the class. Yeah, W-A-T versus W-U-T. I mean, what does W-A-T imply that W-U-T does not imply?
That somebody doesn't know it has an H in there. Now, to be fair to our audience, we do have a lot of people who English is not their first language, who leave comments, and it's wonderful because we're around the world, and so the English language is, as I think it was described, it's part German, part French, and it just hangs out in dark alleys, mugging other languages for loose grammar. The English language is very difficult. So, why? do we expect anybody to know, exactly how to spell every single word in the English language? I don't know how to spell every single word in the English language. And I am very good at spelling a lot of things. I won my fair share of spelling bees in grade school. Never on the national level or even the state level. There wasn't a competition that went beyond my classroom when I was in that situation. But
There's two levels of spelling bees, like in essence, right? One where you can study every word that could be on there, which is common in like high school and grade school. And other ones where you actually have to know like the origin of the word. Was it Greek, Latin, whatever?
Right.
And that's how you figure out how to spell, because there's no way you could have memorized the spelling of that word.
right.
So that's why you ask for it in a sentence, try to get a clue, like where's it come from?
Right.
What is it? Is this scientific nomenclature, or is this like some sort of philosophical term that I could break it down? Oh, it's Greek root. So Greeks use this for the different syllabic things. So I am a big user of autocorrect and spell checkers on when I'm typing. And there are some words I always stumble on every time I type them. Occurs or occurrence.
Oh, yeah.
That always gets me.
It's a big one.
Like, what is it? Is it 2 C's or 2 R's? I never remember. So I always have to look it up.
Occasion could cause the same problem.
Yeah, occasion. Yeah. So, when I hear a comment about what or what, spelling issue from somebody who's not first language, but also, is it a millennial or Gen Z typing that? Because WUT seems like a shortened thing. Like, what? And that, like, I understand a lot of the shortening that we have on the internet now stems from the old T9s. It was a lot easier to type the letter U in place of the word YOU, especially when they were charging per letter in a text message, which is something they used to do. And your keyboard was 9 keys, and you had to, press through to get to the right
You
letter.
had to keep clicking it till you
had the right letter, and then if you missed, you had to go around again. But yeah, like I understand some of the shortening. Sometimes people type WUT because it's the shorter way of doing it. It's one letter fewer, and you get the same sound out of it.
I think if I were to see WAT or WUT in a comment, I would assume there that somebody has a negative opinion of whatever they're questioning, right? So if somebody put either of those spellings or any similar spelling that's not WHAT, I doubted myself for a second there. Like, did I just spell it right?
Did you spell it right?
I'm pretty sure. I'm almost sure of it.
Are you sure you spelled it right?
Not anymore. No. I need to take a polygraph.
I think we need a polygraph on that.
I would assume the person's making fun of whatever they just watched. So like, what? And then I'm going to assume that if they use a question mark in there, if they use punctuation, that like not only are they making fun of it, but they have a lot more questions than just using no punctuation. So I think you probably could go into a lot of detail trying to super overanalyze what comment is on there. At the end of the day, perhaps the person is saying more by saying less, so like just using WAT or WUT, maybe leaving it up to someone's imagination and assuming in that instance that they are saying something negative is saying more than explaining all of why they don't like that thing, So I don't know. There's perhaps a lot of depth there. Maybe it's something for somebody to study and have some solid opinions about. Probably doesn't matter that much, of course. But if there's someone out there with free time, feel free. That's probably my conclusion.
In the grand scheme of things, probably doesn't matter very much. But there are some internet jargon things that come up. But for me personally, there's a couple. Like if I'm reading like an article or a comment on something that I really don't like, I kind of don't get the internal logic of the argument of the person who's commenting or making this. My immediate response is just WTF. Like I won't go into what that acronym stands for, but WTF is kind of like, I don't get it. And if the logic is completely absent and I really have no way of comprehending what inconsistent leaps they're making, and it's just this massive headache of disjointed words, I go with an internet word. It's spelled DAFUQ. I will not say it out loud for how it's pronounced because it is synonymous with WTF, but goes a bit further. And it's just that one word it's like I'm being slapped in the face with illogic. Whoosh, what? What did I just read?
So, I mean, you're kind of doing the same thing there. Like, that's maybe the difference between WAT and WUT. Like, WTF versus the other one. Like, you're escalating it a little bit. So maybe WAT is like, maybe one of them is the less intense questioning, and maybe the other one's the more intense questioning. Maybe that's what they're shooting for there.
Or maybe it was a typo.
And
we're reading way too far into it.
Why wouldn't we, though? I mean, this has plagued generations. I'm sure of it.
I'm sure. Wow. At least one generation.
We can claim one generation at this point.
All right, what do we have for next question?
What's the most exotic or exciting place you visited? Where would you like to visit that you have not yet visited?
Let's see. Exotic, such a tough descriptor for a locale.
Or exciting. Exotic or exciting.
Or exciting.
Right.
I've been to Gary, Indiana. That was pretty exciting. It's a dangerous murder capital of the United States for a while.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I've been to a few different places, in the United States, all the big cities, I guess, or most of the big cities. I've been to Canada.
Does that count as exotic or interesting?
I mean, it seemed pretty normal to me. It was nice. It was not. I wouldn't call it exotic. I don't really travel much, especially with the corona. I can't imagine.
Oh, you meant the virus. I was thinking
The beer.
the beer. Like, I don't travel very much with the corona. Like, well, why would you? Drinking and driving is not really a good thing to do.
Yeah, we'll answer the where you want to visit separate. So we'll do that, and then
Fair enough.
Jeff, most exciting place you've ever been?
Yeah,
Or exotic?
there's three big ones. These would go under exotic, I think. Went to Haiti. We had planned the trip. This was the earthquake. What year was that? I forget what year it was, but we had planned the trip before the earthquake happened. Would have been around 2010, I think. But we had planned the trip before that had happened. And just so what worked out that we could go down there and just kind of help some things out after the earthquake. So a great place, wonderful people. We did get to visit like a resort kind of thing down there. Beautiful place for sure. I'd love to go back there again. I went to Costa Rica 2 times, and it's a great place, very beautiful, incredible beaches, and a very large focus on sustainability and green living and things like that, which I think works really well for them. Of course, there's a lot of exotic type things there, animals and beaches and foliage, things like that. So beautiful place. I'd love to go back there again. But number 1 on my list would be Tanzania in East Africa, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. I mentioned it before, but I did part of my student teaching there for my undergrad degree in education. And I was there for 2 months, and just an incredible place. Wonderful people. Beaches there are outstanding. Only time I've ever been in the Indian Ocean. I was in the capital. I was in the city there, but nonetheless, I was mostly in the suburbs of it, I guess. And even out there was a lot of really incredible wildlife. Certainly no lions or things like that in that area, but some of the biggest lizards I've ever seen. Not like Komodo dragon type things, but these really huge lizards, and a lot of birds and things like that. So a really wonderful place. So I'm thankful that I was able to travel a good amount, I would say. And I hope to be able to again, but of course, having kids makes that a little bit more difficult. So I'm hoping that's something we can do as the kids get a little bit older. I think traveling is pretty important too. I think it's really important to just experience other people, other cultures, and to understand that where you live is not, that's not it. Like, that's not all that's out there, you know? I use the example of family members that live in New York and have a license plate on the front and back of their car, and they come down to Delaware like, driving illegally? Where's the other license plate? I'm like, well, we only have it on the back, you know? And it strikes me as, you know, that's all they're used to, and this is all I'm used to. And unless you go to other places, you don't realize things are different other places. And of course they do, and that's, you know, it's an exaggeration there, but you have to go and experience other things to realize the way that I do things might not be the only way. Might not be the only way possible. And there's certainly different viewpoints and perspectives. And yeah, I think traveling for that and many other reasons is important.
Yeah. It does make us check our biases.
Yeah, for sure.
So most exotic places I've ever been, or exciting. I don't know. I found London to be really exciting. But I also found, I've been to the French Riviera, a small little town. I think it was a little south of Nice called Fréjus. That was when I was, I think I was like 13 or 14. Was in an exchange program with students there. The students came over to visit us, and we went over to visit them. Spent like 3 weeks there on the French Riviera. Didn't get to enjoy it as much as at 13 as I think I might have in my mid-20s. But it was still a wonderful experience. Got to Stonehenge in England. That was amazing. And I think I was 13. I think we did that because my dad wanted to make sure I had use out of my passport before I went to France. So I got the passport for the trip to France, and then they're like, we're taking a trip to England. Like, okay. It was his excuse to get a trip to England. Got out to see Stonehenge, which is amazing. Other than that, I've been around in the United States quite a bit. Every single state on the eastern seaboard.
Nice.
From Maine to Florida, Ohio, Nevada, Arizona, and California. Grand Canyon was amazing. You know, I thought of it as a big hole in the ground, and it is a big hole in the ground right up until you're standing at the edge of it, looking at the far side a few miles away. And wow,
that is a big hole.
that's a big hole. That's a really big hole. It's a very beautiful hole, though. So,
Nice.
what about the question? Where would you like to go?
Yeah, that you have not yet gone.
Wow, there's so many places. So I like a lot of subject matters that deal with traveling around the world and being other places, like military history. I like shows like The Amazing Race and Grand Tour, which used to be, well, I guess it's Top Gear is a separate show.
The presenters
Right,
from Top Gear.
Yeah. To me, it used to be Top Gear, but in reality, Top Gear is a separate show. But you know, they travel all over and then, you know, drive in unusual ways in different places. So, you know, really, I mean, I like to see everything, but in particular, looking at like researching for true crime videos, you know, places where I've like done a video about like a crime that happened in that location. So, you know, London, Ireland, Scotland, New Zealand, Australia, all different places in Canada. I've only been a few places in Canada, but you know, it's a big country. I'd like to see, you know, different places in you know, Asia and other places in Europe. You know, like France, Germany, Spain. There's just a lot. I mean, I would go. I would go to a variety of places if I could, and you know, it kind of worked out. But traveling is tough. Like for me, it's exhausting. Because sometimes I don't sleep great anyway, and you have like the jet lag, and then, you know, I'm picky about what I eat, right? Which is, you know, part of the experience of going some other place, and that's the part I wouldn't want.
Right.
Just because it would disrupt, you know. So travel is probably harder for me than it's harder relative to my desire to travel. Like there's a disparity there, right? Like, but yeah, I would, you know, like to go lots of places. I remember years and years ago, I was at career day in high school, which I think is pretty much everybody has, right? Where
Yeah.
people come in and basically, you know, tell you about their careers, and you're like, wow, that's much more boring than I thought.
Oh, I never want to do that. Yeah, whenever the counselor starts talking, all the kids are just like, oh.
Yeah, well, I think it's career day when you realize that most jobs are really doing the same thing every day.
Most jobs are super boring, except the firefighters over there. 'Cause everybody loves the firefighter, and no parent wants to be the one following the firefighter.
That's right. Let's now talk about accounting. Yeah. I take one number and then I add it to another.
I sit in a chair all day.
What do you do next?
Let's talk about the fascinating world of accounting.
But anyway, I remember one time, one of the careers I was interested in was being a pilot. Now I couldn't imagine doing it because the physical requirements with being healthy and all. But I was interested in that at the time. And the pilot that we got for career day was one of these pilots. I've met other ones like this, where the only dream was space. I don't know why I remember this so well. I forget what year it was, like junior year. So he was a good guy. But he was like, people were like, oh, what kind of schedule do you have as a pilot? Like, you make your own schedules, a lot of hours? Well, the airline industry heavily regulates hours. By the way, the reason you should become a pilot is so you can go to space. Because if you got to go to space, that would be awesome. Like, oh, okay. So what kind of planes might you fly? Like twin engine? Some have 3 engines, propeller. Son, let me tell you about space. Like, wow, this guy really wants to go to space.
If you want to talk about space, why didn't you become an astronomer?
Well, he wanted to be an astronaut, right? Like, but very few pilots.
Right.
Like, you have to have a very specific health profile to be considered for an astronaut. Like, there was a movie a while back, Neil Armstrong was incredible. We should do a video about Neil Armstrong. He's incredible, incredible guy. But like the rigor, like you have to go through to be selected. How many people get cut out? And of course, he was already a test pilot, so he had met a lot of the.
And by the mid '80s, it wasn't even looking for pilots anymore. It was more. They were looking more for scientists.
Right, other positions on the.
Yeah, they still have to fit the health profile and make it through the physical stuff, but they want scientists. They want people they can send up to the space station to do experiments. Yeah. We don't need the daredevil pilots who are willing to, John Glenn, rocketing across the sky in orbit. We don't need that guy anymore. We got it down to a science, launching people into space.
Yeah.
So much so that a billionaire can do it.
That's right. But yeah, times have changed. But back then it was very, the path to space travel was almost exclusively through pilots, military and mostly military, military pilots. But yeah, I admired his, I admired his conviction to that one goal. Like, and I was thinking, wow, like there's all these places you could go around the earth. This is what came to mind. Like you could travel to Asia, Africa, Europe, all these places. But this guy wanted to take it to space. Like it wasn't good enough. But at the same time, I'm like, I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
you want to go to space, is what you're saying?
I don't have the physical condition to go to space, but it would be.
Neither did William Shatner, but they managed to get him up there.
But yet here we are.
Here we are. I think it's amazing that William Shatner was up there. And it's reported that in the 5 minutes he was up there, he had no fewer than 3 affairs with alien creatures.
That's good. Where would I want to visit?
Want to visit?
Not
Well,
yet.
you've been to Tanzania for crying out loud. Where else do you want to go? Space?
Space, definitely. No, I'd love to go back to Africa. I really don't care where, frankly. There's a culture there that is unmistakable and really a wonderful thing to experience, even from an outsider's view. And just something that really just changed me a lot. That this is different, but it felt so good for something to be eye-opening, and just like these people are living in a different way, not a bad way certainly, but just a different way, and I think this is wonderful. And yeah, just being able to experience something different. So I don't know. I mean, I went to East Africa, maybe West Africa. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of wonderful places there. As far as like within the United States, I don't know. I really haven't been. I've never been out west anywhere, so I think that would be cool. Maybe like some of the national parks, those kind of areas. Going to California would be nice, just to say that I did, I guess. We went up to Gloucester, Massachusetts. It's like north of Boston, and that was cool. But going up to like Maine and New England, more of New England, that would be nice too. So, yeah, be a lot of places, and yeah, I kind of like travel. So you were talking, Dr. Grande, about like the difficulties of travel, and so like being on the plane for, I think it was like 24 hours of travel for going over to Tanzania. I liked that a lot. And like I was meeting new people and it was whatever, and it was really fun for me. Now, of course, that was a time in my life when I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. So traveling with kids is obviously a nightmare. So that would be a lot different now. But that's worth it to me to some extent. Like the discomfort that I experienced with that long travel then, and it was 2012. Whatever discomfort I experienced was worth it to me. So like whatever that was worth it. Whatever I might have to deal with now with all the other responsibilities I have now versus then, it's it's more worth it to me to have that experience than whatever other difficulties, obviously to some extent. But so I think that's a priority for me, and trying to fit it into my life now is, just part of working all that out, So that's where I'm at. Mike, what do you got?
Well, definitely want to get back to England. I want to get up to Scotland. Of course, the fiance and I are already planning that for honeymoon.
Nice.
I want to get over to London. She's never been outside of the continental United States, so she wants to take a trip over to England. We want to get up to Scotland. Ideally, honestly, I want to take a tour of Europe, hitting folklore spots. Like, I'd like to hit Prague and the house in Prague that's supposed to have housed the golem of Prague. And I'd like to get into Berlin and see some of the things there. I'd love to get to the castle that Mary Shelley was at when she wrote Frankenstein. Some other places in Europe, just finding places that have folklore attached to them. I'd like to go to fairy school in Iceland. Actually have a school where you can get certified as a fairy hunter.
Nice.
Yeah. Get a certificate and everything.
Nice.
Iceland would be amazing. I would like to spend some time in Germany, just because I think it's a wonderful place. There's a lot of history, that isn't centered on 1930s through the late 1940s. That's far, far beyond that. Anywhere else? I kind of want to go to Japan at some point, but I also have heard a lot of stories about the way outsiders are treated in Japan. And, if I stick to the touristy stuff, I should be fine. But one of the things, I just don't want to stick to all touristy stuff, because I don't speak Japanese. I don't speak German either. But before I get to Germany, I want to speak German. That's about it.
Yeah.
I mean, and if I could go other places too, like anything that's fascinating, I wouldn't mind hitting up some of the like crime scene places that are, from famous cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something about standing, like where something like that happened or near it. It doesn't really add much value to understanding the case, but it's more the feeling, like just the sense of standing there and knowing that it all happened.
Obviously, these are unspoken things, but of course, all of us left off of our lists all the exciting places in Delaware. So
I've been to the Screen Door Factory. That was amazing. Yeah.
Clearly, number one on our list, Delaware beaches and going to Dover, capital of Delaware.
The Monster
That's about
Mile.
it. Yeah,
The Monster
yeah,
Mile.
right. So
Regularly attend, go to movies and places in Murdertown, USA. I mean, Wilmington, Delaware. The amazing, fun places. Middletown's a growing place.
yeah, that's exciting.
That is an exciting All in here in
Congested,
Delaware.
a lot of traffic.
Very congested.
Especially for like modern, it has modern roads.
Yeah.
So you would think that they would have figured that out, but it's worse than up here, I think. Yeah, but living in Delaware, you do get to travel to a lot of nearby states.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sure we've all been to Maryland, Pennsylvania,
Yeah,
New Jersey, New York, Virginia.
My fiance's horse is in Pennsylvania, so we drive up there regularly so we can visit the horse.
There are people who live in big states like California and Texas that have never been to another state.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Texas, you can drive for 2 days and still be in Texas.
Yeah. Next question is, have you ever had to draw a loaded firearm at anyone?
No,
That's a no for me.
no.
That's about
And I
it.
hope to never have to.
Right.
That'd be horrible.
Yeah. Anything else to add?
Not really. I mean, I think that if I really had to, I think I could, but I don't ever want to be in a situation where I have to do.
Yeah.
I for the sake of clients, I don't have a concealed carry permit. I've mentioned that before. The only place that I would carry it outside of my home would be to my office, and I don't think my clients would be comfortable knowing that I have a firearm on me sitting in an office trying to do counseling. It just would be counterproductive. So it would sit in my car. And what's the point at that point? So I don't think I'll ever necessarily be in a situation where I'm able to draw a loaded firearm on somebody.
Yeah. I mean, the firearm, it's an important right, but it's not something you ever actually want to have to use. Right? It's
Not against another person.
right. You have to use your brain to stay safe, and you can avoid most every problem just by making intelligent decisions. But sometimes, like a home intruder or whatever, that can happen. Even if you kind of played your cards right and been careful, someone can break into your house, and you don't know until that moment if you can actually do it. Now how much you train, it's not training. It's can you actually point a gun? Oh, I guess even more to the point, could you point it and fire it? Right, because you're not going to stop too many people by pointing it. That's in the movies. In real life, when you draw a weapon, people keep charging or attacking because they were going to do that anyway. But yeah, it's one of those things that I think any gun owner probably wonders about. Like, could they really use it to defend themselves, even when they were allowed to?
Yeah.
Who knows?
I think the closest I got there was an incident that happened over the summer. We had the windows open in my house, and all of a sudden we heard like screeching tires and squealing tires, and there was a car, and there was some screaming outside, and then the car took off, squealing tires, and then came back around, squealing the other way, and there was more yelling, and then the car took off, and then it backed up at speed, and we're like, what the heck's going on? And we saw that there was a woman carrying a kid who was maybe 3 or 4, and the driver of the car grabbed her through the window and tried to drive off, and she only made it 10 or 15 feet before he stopped. She started walking the other direction. They were yelling, and my fiance was just like, I don't know what to do. What is going on? So we stepped outside to make our presence known, trying to and had our phones out ready to record it just in case. And we watched, and she started walking in front of our driveway. So he's like, Miss, would you like to come in for a glass of water? Would you like to, trying to basically say, this is a safe haven. If you need anything, we're here. And she's like, no, thank you. She kept walking. Car, driver of the car, male, drove off and spun around and went back the other way. And when I went back in the house, I was just like, okay, so we've just made ourselves a safe haven for this woman. I want to make sure that I'm in a position to maybe defend this household if something happens. If she comes back and wants to come in the house, I have no problem with that. I want to make sure that this woman is safe and that she can be. But this guy's doing some crazy stuff with his driving. I don't know what he's capable of. So I did go down to my lab, and I took one of my pistols out. I made sure that it was loaded, live, and I put it in an easily accessible place right next to the door. Nothing ever came of it, but that was my mindset. Was if this woman needs to be protected, I want to be able to do so when I can. But it was going to be in defense of the home.
Right.
It's the closest I've ever come to that particular question, having to draw it on a live person. But I think that I put it in a place where I could easily get to it.
Yeah.
Made sure that it was ready.
Sometimes they're necessary, right? For self-protection, and it's nice to have them available for that. But to actually have to use it, that'd be a terrible result for everybody. I mean, it's not. We talked about this with other cases. It's not something people should be proud of. Like, oh, I used it.
Yeah.
No, that's the worst possible outcome. Even if it was 100% not your fault and it was a totally justifiable shooting, that's still not something to be thrilled about.
Yeah.
Especially if it ended up with a death, with a fatality.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not only is there a person dead, but there's another person who caused that, and that has a psychological impact.
Yeah. You could use that point with law enforcement, military, anybody in those kind of situations where they're in a situation where they very well might have to not only draw their weapon, but might have to discharge it on somebody else, self-defense, or in the line of duty, or defending themselves, or whatever it might be, and just how much they carry with them after that, no matter the circumstance, just how much they carry with them after that, of course, which is why veterans have such a difficult transition back into civilian life based on what they did, saw, experienced, and have to just process through everything that they had to do, were instructed to do, and had to do in that line of duty, and police officers as well. The only thing I can probably add, not owning a weapon myself, but having used one at firing ranges and things like that, it's going to pull the trigger, just a target practice. Obviously I'm not pointing it at anyone or anything, but just the weight, not only the physical weight of it, but the emotional weight of that. How much power, I guess, you're holding in your hand, right? Literally the power of life or death, should it be in that situation. That is a heavy weight, because I remember the first time, I thought about that, this is, it wasn't easy to pull the trigger, because I'm like, I know what's going to happen next. A bullet's going to come out of this thing, hit a target, of course, but the power of this is a magnificent thing, and obviously shouldn't be used lightly in any circumstance. But just knowing that is something that people have to use on a daily basis to defend themselves, or of course with officers and those in the military. It's crazy. It is a weird thing that we can have that much power, but of course some circumstances deem it necessary to protect yourself or protect others or protect your life in many different circumstances. So it's especially from someone who doesn't own one, it was a very foreign concept, and really it still is. But just knowing what that is like to have that kind of power in your hand, I guess, it's a different thing for sure. Last question. Could you take some time to outline some of your differences, but then also explain why open conversation like this is so important? I really appreciate this example of the types of dialogue we should all be having often. In particular, sometimes we cover cases where, of course, we're covering facts about things, but there also might be an opinion about something in there. And of course, the person asking this is referencing how we all might have different views on things, but still being able to talk rationally, reasonably, and present those things, even if they're different. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the political differences, I think are one thing that make the show interesting. Right? One of the worst things that can happen with, I think, a podcast is where somebody's like an ideologue and they're always on one side, right? So you watch them over and over and you're like, well, I know how they're going to interpret this, because it's always going to be either conservative or liberal or whatever. I think, our commitment that binds us is probably like a commitment to logic, like just reason, which was really the foundational concept for the United States. Look at the word, how often the word reason and reasonable come up in the early documents. It's all about being a good person and making good decisions. That's what the United States was based on. that the human beings are capable of reason and debate. So, I like, we have that in common. The diversity would be, maybe political orientation. Mike, as you said, you lean to the left.
I lean to the left a bit.
Yeah.
I do consider myself kind of more middle of the road. I definitely don't consider myself to be like extreme left, because I do have some rather right leaning views on things like firearms. But in general, I tend to lean towards the left.
Yeah, as you are now.
Right. That's a physical choice.
A literal leaning.
Yeah, and I certainly, I think would be a little right of center. But there's a lot of liberal beliefs that make a lot of sense. A lot of social programs. Like there's a lot of liberal thought that makes, it makes logical sense to me. But at the same time, on the conservative side, I do like the pro-gun. I do like the fiscal policies that historically conservatives have endorsed, although I don't know if they really do anymore. That's probably one of my criticisms of conservatism lately. I feel like that was always like what conservatives had, and not many people understand math on either side anymore. I don't think it's like conservatives have abandoned it. I think it's innumeracy. It's like illiteracy. It's everywhere. And how much debt do we have in this country? And people are like, oh, let's borrow more. Let's borrow a few trillion more. I doubt these people could count to a trillion or know what a trillion actually is.
I don't think anyone can actually count to a trillion.
Well, like I don't know that if they can assemble it.
Right.
Like even like a billion, you think about it, that's 1,000 millions.
I think a million is even just comprehending how much a million of something is beyond a real comprehension. Like we can say, okay, $1 million. I'd love to have $1 million. Well, like the exact amount of that, it's staggering. Just staggering. Like we talk about like the biggest football stadium can hold like 30,000 people. Like that's nowhere near $1 million, and that is humongous.
Yeah, it's 1,000 times 1,000. Right. I remember in grade school, and this was long before technology was available like we have now. Somebody's dad or mom at work printed out 1 million, the asterisk, like the little star. It didn't actually get to 1 million. It was like 900 and something thousand, but it was close. And brought it in so we could understand 1 million. And it was like that. Like it was incredible. I couldn't believe how much paper they consumed. Now that would be, that would offend sensibilities. But then it was
that'd be a whole tree.
Yeah, really.
But yeah, I think that that's why I think I would say a little right of center. But I don't look at the political ideology as like, that's something that is a reflection of being reasonable to me. Like that's my version of reason. It's not something that I look at as, okay, let me analyze the situation. Let me go check in with my ideology to make sure it's consistent. Because I have opinions that are wildly liberal and wildly conservative sometimes. But most of the time I stay, pretty close to just right or just left of moderate. But that, it's like I said, secondary. On any particular issue, any particular case, I'm always going to go with logic. My understanding of it, the best I can compute.
And being able to have the sensibility to realize, like you said, Dr. Grande, that just because you might adhere to one thing on one side or one thing on whatever, doesn't mean you have to on everything. And doesn't mean that it makes sense to even do that. Or doesn't mean that that's what everyone has to do, right? But more importantly, that it's things that make sense, that are logical, things that help people, things that actually make sense to help people, things that are actually going to make sense financially, et cetera, all of those things. And I think that's probably an important part of that being reasonable and being logical is understanding that my way of doing things may not be the best way of doing things, and the right way of doing the conservative way of doing things, or the liberal way, might not be the correct way to do things, and that there might be some overlap there, and things like that. So it's, I think there's a lot to be said for reasonable, not just adhering to one side of things, but knowing that there's a full gamut of it, and that there's a lot to be said from people of many different perspectives, and that just probably makes things even better ultimately.
Yeah, my challenge to people with a strong position one way or the other is you should spend your time learning about the opposition. Right? Like that's the highest expression of trying to be a good citizen. I think what happens though is these beliefs come into place. People identify as one or the other or whatever, and then that's what colors their opinion from now on. It's like, well, this case must be this person's fault because I'm liberal or I'm conservative. Well, that's backwards reasoning. What does logic tell you? Oh, well, maybe in this one case, I think the other side's guilty, but I don't want to say that because it offends my team or whatever. But, the polarization of, politics is actually, I think, no less than a lethal threat to our society. We see what happened with the whole, with the riots, everything, in January of 2020. I mean, to think that could happen in this country, I think Americans always felt like that couldn't happen here. There couldn't be like a revolution or attempt at revolution. Yeah. The election fraud thing, like the claim that there's election fraud when there was no evidence of a fraud. Right. How does that happen here? But the story, is like, oh, if you're conservative, you have to play along, and like it was no big deal. But what it was a big deal. It was wrong. Mm-hmm. It was a danger to democracy and freedom. So regardless of being a little conservative, I'm going to say, no, we can't have that. At the same time, the extreme left, I look at like cancel culture. That's nonsense. There's no reason to believe that makes sense. And yet, the left hangs on to that cancel culture. Now, this is important. It doesn't, there's no reason to believe, there's no scientific reason to believe cancel culture is a good thing. So, both sides hang on to unhealthy beliefs. And there's not much in terms of like a real discussion about these topics. And I think that's what we offer here is a real discussion. It's not colored like, well, what I'm going to say because I'm the liberal guy or I'm the conservative guy. That's so intellectually lazy, right? And I guess it does make for predictable programming though, right? Like when you have that, when you have like the two hosts, say, and one's like extreme on one side, one's extreme on the other. Like, oh, I always know what the debate's going to be. But at some point, I think our thinking has to kind of evolve past that and become more sophisticated, right? Because we're all in this together, right? Mm-hmm. In the world, and those in the United States, people in Delaware, like whatever your group is geographically, we're in it together. That's my thought.
That's good.
And here I was going to say the biggest difference between us is our beards.
Clearly.
We do tend to have similar sense of humor, but they're also very different. Of course, our political beliefs are different. We also have differing religious beliefs and backgrounds. But I think that it's important for us to recognize that we are different without making the differences the central point of contention.
Right. Differences aren't bad.
Yeah. The differences are celebrated, the diversity of our thoughts. Yes, we are all white males in the United States. We do have the privilege of being in that particular group, but our experiences are each unique. The things that we've gone through in our lives, the way our minds work, they're all unique and different, and that diversity is much more important, I think, overall to the species. Recognizing the differences in our minds and celebrating the differences in our minds and our cultures is much more important than recognizing that there's a difference in skin tones between people. And I think that having even conversations, even when we disagree on things, I don't think we've ever screamed at each other. I mean,
just off camera.
Just off camera, yeah. Well, yeah, not on camera.
That's when the thumbtacks come out.
The thumbtack.
I told you about that.
Don't make me pull the thumbtack.
Don't make me turn this camera off and start yelling.
It's like we're gonna have to cut right here, and then when we come back, we calm. All right, we're fine.
Cool now?
We don't yell at each other.
All the thumbtacks back on. Wipe the blood off on our pants.
Just have to make sure that they don't notice the cut there. We don't generally yell at each other on this show. I mean, many comments are that people fall asleep while listening to us because we're a very calming influence. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's necessarily that, oh, you guys are so boring, you put us to sleep. It's a calming influence because we're not the same, talking heads bantering back and forth at each other with the contentious nature of like, oh, I'm liberal, I'm conservative, blah, 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 blah. We're not doing
Let's
that.
now hate each other because that's going to solve the problem.
No, there's no reason to bring that kind of vibe into, we're talking about, either people being murdered, which is a heavy subject to talk about, or we're talking about just weird cult things or aliens or things like that, or we're talking about The Simpsons, like
And Star Wars.
or Star Wars. Jeff still hasn't seen, or Airplane.
I have seen Star Wars. I just don't
Didn't
care
like
for
it. Didn't like Star Wars.
Like Star Wars.
Yeah. So there's a real
There's a big
divide.
difference. There's a big divide. That is the biggest divide.
I think that was like the first or second episode that we made, and the comments were. I'm thankful to everyone out there. The comments were supportive, of that difference, and thankfully so. But I'm still afraid for my life.
And that's the one that's the big difference. I'm glad we don't bring that up very often, because that's the thing that would destroy the camaraderie that we have.
Yeah. I mean, and if you guys did bring it up often, that would make me more fearful for my life. So I'm glad you don't bring it up more often.
I just wear the Star Wars shirts every once in a while, and I don't make my Chewbacca noises on camera. I do a pretty spot on Wookiee.
Well, I guess that'll be one of the questions that'll be coming up. Just let Mike please do
Can you do the Chewbacca voice? Do the Wookiee thing. Maybe if we get that question, maybe.
Maybe. All right. Well,
Maybe.
you've heard it out there, America. World. Mike might do it. Somebody has to ask for it.
Yeah, but we converse. I think that's the most important thing. It's a conversation, not ranting at each other.
Yeah, disagreeing is really about learning. And I don't think people know how to disagree anymore with the political polarization. It's like, let's be enemies. But it doesn't make any sense. That's never the way that discourse was supposed to be in debate.
Unfortunately, that's the way it's been throughout human history.
Well, I mean, I think there have been times when people have come together and had healthy debate and discussion. Or is that what you mean? Or do you mean it's been contentious?
But it's been contentious throughout human history. I mean,
yeah, it has a lot. But that's not, I don't think that's the object of it. I think that's a secondary characteristic. The idea is to find a solution that makes everybody unhappy. That's compromise, right? That's
if everyone's equally unhappy, we've done our job.
That's right. And I think now everybody wants to win. Everybody wants their way of thinking to be at the top. And nobody wants to give anything, because if you give something, the other side takes everything. That's the perception.
And statistically speaking, that divide politically, at least in our government, has gotten way worse over the last 40 years. As much as there might have been contention between the Democrats and Republicans in Congress and the Senate in the 1960s and 70s, there was still a lot more bipartisan cooperation and bills being passed. And we watch the divide. Like it's a V shape coming from the 1970s to today. It's V-shaped. Yeah. Like the amount of separation between them, which is terrible, because I think I mentioned this before. Like, the Republican Party represents only like 23% of registered voters, and the Democratic Party only 25% of registered voters. That means 52% of registered voters are neither Republican nor Democrat.
So what else is there? Libertarian, independent?
Mostly independent. Mm-hmm. I think it's like 47% independent, and the rest is made up of other parties. And yet, the Democrats and Republicans are the ones running the show. Uh-huh. They represent less than half of the entire country, but they're speaking for the entire country. And that's not the way democracy is supposed to be working. Mm. But that's what's been happening. And yeah, we've got these two groups who are, I've got to win. I've got to win.
Yep.
But win what?
And for who? Right? It makes a little sense. But yeah, so that's, I like it. I know sometimes, when we get on political topics, like we cover, like Kyle Rittenhouse, there's comments on there like people unhappy about different opinions, whatever. But I think having the different opinions is important in expressing them. It doesn't mean we're right or wrong. It just means we're talking about our opinions and sharing our rationale, more importantly, why we think a certain way. The process of thinking and reaching a logical conclusion is lost with this lens of partisan attitudes, and it worries me. It's not a good sign.
I think it's often attributed to Samuel Clemens, the old saying that opinions are like a-holes. Everyone's got one and they all stink. It is like that. And opinion is just opinion. And everyone is entitled to have an opinion.
And express it, right? And debate it. Like there's a lot you can do with an opinion. And I think even if somebody, like, in my opinion, is wrong on something, I can still learn something from their perspective, how they see the world. And, again, we can all be unhappy if we can just come to a compromise.
Yeah.
I think an important part of that is also learning, and being able to recognize when you are wrong, or recognizing that maybe my opinion is not as based on fact, or is not as well thought out as I thought it was. And being able to recognize you're wrong and admit it, and recognize, I think I need to change something here. And somebody's ego might get in the way, and like, I don't want to admit I'm wrong. I don't want to, I don't want to look bad in front of other people, or I don't want to whatever. But I would argue that by not admitting that you're wrong, you look bad in front of other people, because no one wants to be around someone who's just stuck in the same inflexible way of doing things and never admit that they're wrong, because that person is difficult to be around. That type of person is difficult to be around, doesn't get anywhere in life, just kind of bullies, to a certain extent, bullies people, because they want to just keep being right and right and right. So that's one of the things that I take away from doing this is, you're with other very intelligent people, and
Where?
Right. Where are they at?
Is there other people in the studio?
Do we have them behind the wall?
That's where the real panel's at, behind the wall.
That's why we wear the headphones.
That's right. That's where all the information comes in. And I may think that I'm solid on what I'm thinking, or what I've researched, or whatever. And then I might come in and be like, sheesh, this is like, I'm way off, or whatever, but just the ability to recognize, maybe I'm wrong on this, and that's okay. Like, you're going to be wrong many times in your life, and that's okay too. It doesn't mean that you're stupid, or you're like not a good enough person, or not a whatever. It just means that you're learning, and that is that is what we should be doing our whole lives, whether we're in school, whether we're kids or not, whether we're adults. We should be learning our whole lives, and recognizing that we can't just stick with one way of thinking. It's not going to do anybody any kind of good. So even throughout filming an episode, there have been times, certainly, when I even said it before, that I came in thinking about things one way, and then here's another opinion that differs from mine. You know what? Let me evaluate that. Let me understand how that might impact the way that I think about things. And I think that is not only okay, but probably the best way to do things. Be open to that. And I think you earn a lot of respect that way, ultimately, by being able to learn from other people and respect that other person's perspective.
Yeah, it's flexibility of thought. And I think there's certain things that only come with maturity. And that's one of them that seems to be resistant to, like, when people are really young, they're not very flexible thinkers. When they get older, they have a chance. And of course, impulsivity decreases too. So you could look at, maturity could be, as you mature, you become less impulsive and more flexible. Is one way to think about it.
Right, absolutely.
But it's hard to teach except by example, right? And, maybe some people who are kind of like ideologues look at this and say, I do kind of like the way they can talk things through. Other people might look at it and say, no, they didn't have my opinion, so they're wrong and terrible and bad people overall. Okay, well, we would just hope that people can be flexible and open-minded as they watch the discussion.
To address your point, I thought I was wrong once, but I was mistaken.
Good one. Good one.
It's really a good one. But the truth is, in my 20s, I lived my life by that mantra. Like I thought I was wrong, but I was mistaken. Like I was really very, very. It would hurt when somebody said I was wrong.
Yeah.
The hardest lesson to learn, and I think I learned it when I was going through grad school, was it's okay for me to be wrong, and that I am often wrong, and just admitting, hey, I was wrong, and like I got that fact wrong. I'm okay with that. Like it's not the end of the world. Nothing's going to change. You know, I'm going to get up tomorrow and go back to work. I was wrong. Oh well. You know, in my early 20s, that was the worst thing in the world to be wrong because I have to be perfect in front of everybody. You know, big self-esteem issues. But as things have settled down, I'm getting older, maturing, I'm okay being wrong. And apparently, according to many comedians, stand-up comedians, once I'm married, I will always be wrong. So I've got to get used to that. I've got to learn that lesson, apparently.
All right. So that was the last question, right?
Right.
All right. So we'll wrap up this episode of the murder part on that note, unless there's any further thoughts.
One thing I wanted to mention was I do have a new tchotchke on the table that is John Orr's incendiary devices.
You want to
the cigarette with matches or with a piece of paper. Yeah, we get a look at that. It's probably not as detailed as we could get if we get a close-up camera shot, but I put that together. Had to design the whole thing myself, hand-painted. Looks like a cigarette. So,
just to be clear, it's not a real incendiary device.
no, it's not a real incendiary device. It's made of resin with some paint and flocking. So
I like the smoke effect you got.
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's great.
Mike
It
was
was
saying
even
that's
orange, like a. Yeah, that's.
You were
This is
saying
probably what it really looked like.
You were saying that was the part from a Q-tip. that
Cotton
you put
batting
on
from a
there.
Q-tip, yeah.
Right. That's
I
awesome.
took a pair of tweezers and just kind of like plucked it off.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I know what a cigarette looks like from years of smoking. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. I also did find a picture of the incendiary device, what it looked like online. And I was like, okay, this is what it looked like pre-burn. So I tried to replicate that as closely as I could. And I did a fairly decent job.
Yeah, it looks great.
No, yeah, it does look good. Really
Is
good.
there any ideas for Julie Ray's case?
I don't know. Julie Ray.
It's the kind of thing we should think about before we
Yeah,
start
that's
recording.
right.
Probably
We,
should think about
we
that
should plan a little better.
beforehand. Maybe we should.
There was definitely a knife, but we have a knife.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do have a knife. We don't have a steak knife, but we have a knife. But
There was a ceramic duck.
the ceramic duck, I could do a ceramic
there
duck.
we go.
Yeah,
It's a good one.
I could throw a ceramic duck in there.
You could do a book on Tommy Lynn Sells, maybe like serial killer book or something.
I could do just like the 2020 logo,
There you go. That's a good one.
like the 2020 logo or the ceramic duck.
I think I know who's going to win that contest.
Oh yeah.
I think I'll take a quack at guessing that one.
I know what I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna order a ceramic duck because I don't know why I don't have one in
It can keep you
bathrooms.
safe from serial killers.
That's what I'm saying. I mean,
Oh, the question is, what kind of duck?
oh yeah,
That should be the question. It's not whether the duck or the 2020. It's like it's going to be a ceramic duck, but should it? It's going to be resin, but it'll be look like a ceramic duck. But should it be a realistic duck,
Like a mallard?
like a duck, like a duck decoy kind of realistic looking duck, or a cartoon duck,
oh yeah.
Stylized duck.
a stylized cartoonish duck?
Well, I don't know who's gonna win that one. Those are good questions.
And the question is, if cartoon duck, Daffy or Donald?
We might run into some trademark stuff.
We might run into some trademark issues, so it might not be specifically one of those two, but it'll be close enough to. It'll be 30% different. LuLaRoe reference right there. 30% different.
You know what? It could look like when Daffy Duck I'm gonna think about this. When Bugs Bunny would, I think, shoot, or not Bugs Bunny, maybe the hunter would shoot
Elmer Fudd.
Elmer Fudd.
Yeah, when Elmer Fudd would shoot Daffy, and then like his face would get kind of rearranged. Maybe that's 30% enough. I don't know.
It might be. Yeah, 30% enough might be like the one episode where it was actually Bugs Bunny drawing the Daffy Duck cartoon, and he redrew him on all fours with a big flower around his head. Like that.
Yeah,
Something like that. We'll put that in the comments.
that's good. That's good.
ceramic realistic duck, cartoony duck. Those are the choices for the ceramic duck on this one.
Yeah, so put your thoughts about that in the comments, and any comments about the case or questions for other episodes or ideas for other episodes, let us know. We read the comments. We appreciate it. We will be back pretty soon with another murder part and or alien lizard humanoids. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.